recognition. The sea disappeared after the Kakhovka Dam was destroyed in June 2023, leading to devastating floods downstream. The road where I used to sell fruit is now used by tanks, not tourists. And yet, my old, previously abandoned home seemed, from the satellite pictures, to have turned into a hive of activity. To find out why, I tried reaching out to locals I still know, but getting answers was very difficult. Many have left, and those who stayed are afraid of speaking to the media. Frontline locations are particularly lawless places, where retribution from Russian forces can be swift and brutal. What used to be a peaceful, sleepy village has turned into a zone of fear. One acquaintance told me that locals preferred to stay indoors because of all the drones. "It's very dangerous here," I was told. "Our village has changed a lot, Vitaly." Given the danger and devastation caused to Verkhnya Krynytsa by the war, who could have possibly made the track marks on the new road leading to and from my old home? It had to be Russian soldiers, I thought. Shortly after the invasion, local authorities in Zaporizhia said they had information that Russian troops were staying in the village. To check if my hunch was right, that Russian soldiers had moved into my old house, I approached Ukraine's 128th Brigade, which is involved in operations in the area. "You are not wrong. It's extremely likely," its spokesman Alexander Kurbatov told me. As locals have been fleeing frontline areas, they are being replaced with Russian military, he said. Nobody I knew in the village wanted to take the risk of taking a closer look at my old house, so I asked my BBC Verify colleague to obtain and analyse recent satellite images. They showed that the dirt road got more use when the weather became colder and wetter, possibly because Russian soldiers found life in trenches unbearable during the harsh Ukrainian winters. I may not find out the truth about what happened to my childhood home and who is now seemingly living there for some time yet. Certainly not while the village is under occupation. For now, it seems likely that it has become a tiny cog in the wider machine of Russia's war in Ukraine.
That was Vitaly Shevchenko. I'm Pascal Harter. The producer was Polly Hope. And that's all for this week. But you can hear more stories of the real lives behind the news headlines by searching for From Our Own Correspondent on bbc.com. And we'll be back with fresh stories next weekend. So do join us again then, here on the BBC World Service.
That was the BBC programme.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio 1. I'm Corey Funk, sitting in today and tomorrow for Marcy Marcusa. Well, of course, lots of news breaking over the weekend after the U.S. striked Iran. We're going to have lots of analysis and, of course, speak with an Iranian Manitoban today on the show. But first, let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines.
Yes, and there was dancing and cheering for Iran in downtown Winnipeg yesterday as Iranian Winnipeggers and supporters celebrated at Portage in Maine after those U.S. and Israeli strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader. Shala Shojai says she was proud to be celebrating in Winnipeg just as people were also dancing and cheering in the streets of Iran. A Winnipeg assistant professor, though, argues those strikes on Iran by the U.S. and Israel are a breach of international law. University of Manitoba's Nathan Doreko says the United Nations only excuses attacks on a foreign country for self-defense or if approved by the Security Council. He says neither bar was met. I'll be back with more Manitoba news coming up at 6:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
-10 right now, heading for a high today of 1. With us behind the glass this morning, we've got Abby Aniemi, who is our studio technician, going to be keeping an eye on the weather. Sierra Sanders is our studio director today, keeping an eye on the commute. And Darren Morash is our YouTube producer, keeping an eye on, well, YouTube. It's coming up this next hour on the show after the death of Iran's leader in the U.S. and Israeli military attack over the weekend. Many are now wondering whether the regime change will be possible in that country. We're going to talk to a political scientist about that situation and the political consequences of the weekend strike in Iran. Also, negotiations on a global treaty to end plastic pollution are stalled, but could Canada get things back on track? We're going to talk about the World Ocean Summit happening in Montreal this week. But first, here coming up on Information Radio, cholesterol screening for children. We're going to find out why Canadian Pediatric Society is recommending all kids get tested for high cholesterol early. That conversation coming up right here on Information Radio. I'm Corey Funk, sitting in today for Marcy Marcusa. I'll see you after World Report.
On cue.
I'm Garvey Bailey, in for Tom Power. After taking a decade-long break from music, Hilary Duff is back with a new album, which dives into the messy, vulnerable parts of life in her late 30s. She's here to talk about finally feeling ready to open up on this record and reflect on her early days as a child star.
I only want the beginning, I don't want the end. Want the part where you
Cue
say that.
this morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Martina Fitzgerald. The Iranian Red Crescent says more than 550 people had been killed since the U.S. and Israel launched their attack on Iran. Air raid sirens ring out across Jerusalem and Tel Aviv as Iran continues to fire back. Iran's capital has been hit with another round of Israeli strikes. Several explosions have been heard in Tehran, but with widespread internet outages and most media refused entry, it's difficult to get a clear picture of what's unfolding on the ground. The CBC's Briar Stewart is in neighboring Turkey with the latest.
At the Kapaköy border crossing between Turkey and Iran, hundreds of people go back and forth over the border, which cuts through a remote swath of mountainous terrain. Heading back into Iran, Ali Shakir, who works driving a truck. How do you feel about what's going on in Iran? He said the war should really just be between Iran and Israel, and told CBC News that he doesn't think it's fair that Iran is now forced to take on other adversaries like the U.S. We got a much different view from a 23-year-old woman who asked us not to identify her. She fled to Turkey from Tehran in January during the widespread protests that were violently struck down by government forces. Thousands were killed. The woman told us she was planning to return to Iran today, but her mother called her and warned her to stay away a little longer.
I don't really know what's going to happen yet, because it won't end with just Khamenei dying. The whole regime has to fall, and it's not really clear what is going to happen.
It's exceedingly difficult to get an accurate picture of what's going on in Iran. State media has reported several explosions today, and a hospital was damaged in the capital in strikes Sunday night. Iran's representative to the UN says the country's sprawling nuclear facility at Natanz was struck. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, says they haven't been able to yet contact Iran's nuclear regulators.
We hope this indispensable channel of communication can be re-established as soon as possible.
Grossi says elevated radiation levels have not been detected in countries bordering Iran. Briar Stewart, CBC News, at the Kapaköy border crossing.
3 U.S. fighter jets have crashed in Kuwait. U.S. military officials are calling it a case of friendly fire. The planes were on a combat mission to Iran when they were mistakenly shot down by Kuwaiti air defenses. All 6 aircrew managed to eject safely. They've been rescued and are reported to be in stable condition. Meanwhile, in Kuwait City, U.S. officials are telling embassy staff to stay away. There are reports of fire and smoke inside the compound after a strike at or near the U.S. diplomatic mission. We expect to hear more from the Trump administration in about an hour. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is supposed to provide an update. Let's bring in Willie Lowry from our Washington bureau. Willie, what will you be listening for?
Yeah, so Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will provide the first public in-person update on what they're calling Operation Epic Fury. The U.S. has amassed a huge amount of firepower in the Middle East, including 2 carrier groups and the largest aircraft carrier in the world in the USS Gerald R. Ford. Hegseth and Kane will likely be pressed on why Washington started this conflict. The Trump administration briefed some leaders in Congress last week, but they did not seek congressional approval ahead of the strikes. The attack also seemingly goes against much of what President Donald Trump campaigned on, which was an end to the country's forever wars. Last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that Kane and other Pentagon officials warned of the dangers of a long-term military campaign in the region. So I'll be looking for their responses, essentially, to all of those questions.
Willie, we know that the U.S. military has already endured some losses in this conflict. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. According to U.S. Central Command, 3 service members have been killed and 5 others seriously wounded since the operation began early Sunday morning. Trump says he expects more to die.
We pray for the full recovery of the wounded and send our immense love and eternal gratitude to the families of the fallen. And sadly, there will likely be more. Before it ends, that's the way it is.
Trump vowed to avenge the soldiers' deaths and said the U.S. would continue fighting until it achieved all of its objectives. But what exactly those objectives are, well, that's still very unclear.
That is Willie Lowry in Washington. Thank you, Willie.
My pleasure.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada and India are embarking on a new relationship. He's meeting with his counterpart, Narendra Modi, in New Delhi. Carney says theirs is a valued partnership, one that is about to include new ambitions. This morning, Carney announced a deal worth billions of dollars between India and a Saskatchewan-based company.
The government of India and Cameco have signed a major $2.6 billion uranium supply agreement supporting India's nuclear ambitions and our shared commitment to clean, reliable baseload power.
By 2030, our countries expect to double trade to $70 billion annually. This is all part of the Canadian government's push to reduce dependence on the United States. Some of the sexual assault charges against Frank Stronach could be stayed when his trial resumes today in an Ontario court. The auto parts magnate is facing 11 charges linked to 7 women. He's pleaded not guilty. Jamie Strachan reports.
One after another, 6 women have testified, often in gritty detail, that they were sexually assaulted by Canadian businessman Frank Stronach. Almost all told of meeting Stronach at his long-closed Toronto restaurant, Rooney's. The alleged assaults took place at Stronach's waterfront condo, another midtown building, and at a Toronto hotel. The allegations span 1977 to 1990.
This is raising issues related to memory.
Toronto lawyer Linda O'Brien, who is not directly involved in this trial, says these cases are challenging. In this case, during often blistering cross-examination, Stronach's lawyer keyed in on testimony given in court, never before mentioned in statements to police, and vigorously challenged recollections of events and details.
There's going to be that blurry memories, faded memories, because at no point during a sexual assault is the complainant thinking, I'm going to be cross-examined on this someday.
There's something else looming over the case. The defense has filed an abuse of process motion to be heard at the conclusion of the trial, alleging the Crown coached witnesses during trial preparation. Former Crown Michael Korstein, also not involved in this case, says it's reserved for extreme cases.
It's an extremely high threshold for the defense to meet, and the Crown conduct has to be deemed, for lack of a better word, shocking to the average member of the community.
If successful, some charges against Stronach could be stayed, effectively dismissing those counts. The 7th and final complainant is expected to testify today. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
An Ontario man came up empty-handed after listing thousands of dollars in tickets with resale giant StubHub. CBC's Go Public team investigated and uncovered questions about ticket transfer rules and weak consumer protection. Rosa Marcatelli reports.
Months before the race dates, Formula One fan Paul Mann bought 9 three-day passes to the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal. When his group trip fell apart, he listed 7 passes on StubHub.
It seemed like the best choice, honestly, the safest choice.
The digital tickets sold and then vanished from the site. StubHub blamed a glitch and promised a fix. It never came. And here's the kicker. Man was out more than $6,000 in lost sales. And then StubHub charged him an extra $3,200 in penalties. StubHub later blamed ticket transfer restrictions put in place by race organizers, saying that's what blocked Man's tickets from being delivered.
I was shocked.
University of Toronto's digital platforms expert, Evan Light, reviewed StubHub's user agreement for Go Public.
Basically, they absolve themselves of any responsibility for anything. The text is quite amazing.
Despite all that, StubHub is still listing non-transferable tickets, saying transfer restrictions aren't fair to consumers. Grand Prix de Canada organizers disagree, though, saying the resale site isn't allowed to do that, and warns tickets might be cancelled. After Go Public inquiries, StubHub gave Man his money. Rosa Marcatelli, CBC News, Calgary.
That is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm Martina Fitzgerald. This is CBC News.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Corey Funk, in for Marcy Marcusa. Minus 10 right now at the Forks, heading for a high today of -1. But up north, though, cold warning in effect, Brochet to Dooley Lake. Yellow cold warning, that is. Feels more like -45, -50. Coming up this hour on the show, after the death of Iran's leader in the U.S. and Israeli military attack over the weekend, many are now wondering whether regime change will be possible for that country. We're going to talk to a political scientist about the situation and the potential consequences. Plus, negotiations on a global treaty to end plastic pollution are stalled, but could Canada get things back on track? We're going to have that conversation. But first, here on Information Radio, high cholesterol is not usually thought of as a childhood ailment, but now the Canadian Pediatric Society wants universal screening for all Canadian children in order to prevent problems later in life. So we're going to talk with the lead author just ahead. But right now at 6:11, let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines.
Good morning. Well, a Winnipegger who spent years on a wait list for a highly specialized surgery is now on the road to recovery. Daniel McClellan had to get his jaw joints replaced because his lower jaw had partially fused to his skull. Only a handful of surgeons in Canada could do that procedure. We're going to hear what happened in his story coming up. As well, as you mentioned, there was dancing in the streets of downtown Winnipeg yesterday. A small group of Iranian Winnipeggers celebrating U.S. and Israeli strikes in Iran over the weekend, attacks which killed Iran's supreme leader. We'll hear from some people at that rally and also from some people who don't think the U.S. and Israel were right to attack Iran. We'll hear more coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That is Heather Wells at our CBC News desk. Well, looks like a tale of two very different weather situations for the province this morning. Eh?
Yeah, Corey, a tale of two seasons for sure. The south will stay on the mild side under a mix of sun and clouds, while up north we're tracking this yellow extreme cold warning that's gripping most part of the northern region, but focusing around to Dooley Lake and Brochet at this time. Other regions up north not getting warnings, but we're still seeing wind chills in the values of the -40s. It might even get to -50s with the wind chill values in most regions up north today. In Churchill, we're still tracking a near blizzard condition that's developing for that region. If the wind speed keeps its momentum, that should be hitting that part of the province probably by the evening period. For Winnipeg right now, -10. It's clear outside. Temperatures expected to hover between -9 and -4 this morning. We're expecting a mix of sun and clouds and a breezy south winds that's going to be shifting to the the northwest later. A high will be hitting -1 today with some cloudy conditions. While that's the conditions we're seeing in the southern regions, -9 to -16. While up north, we're looking at -13 towards -27 in the northern region with a wind chill of -46 around Tuduli Lake this morning. But for Winnipeg, we are currently at -10. We're heading to a high of -1.
Thank you very much, Abby.
Thank you.
That's Abby Adeyemi, our studio technician, and keeping an eye on the weather. Also with us here in studio is Sierra Sanders, our director, and she's keeping an eye on the commute. Hello.
Hello, Corey. Still kicking off this Monday show, getting the week started. So not too much going on out there. Haven't heard of anything getting in people's way or anything causing any backups. But if that's not the case, the number to call throughout the show, if there is something that is getting in your way, whether you are here in the city or anywhere else in the province, I'd love to know what you're seeing out there. The number to call is 204-788-3093.
Well, up first here on Information Radio, high cholesterol is not something you typically think of in kids, but the Canadian Pediatric Society is now calling for screening for all children between 2 and 10 years old. The goal is to cut the risk of heart attacks and stroke later in life. And joining me now is co-chair and lead author of this position paper. Dr. Michael Khoury is a pediatric cardiologist at the Stollery Children's Hospital and an associate professor at the University of Alberta. We reached him in Edmonton this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So what prompted you to make this recommendation to, screen kids for high cholesterol?
Well, we know that cardiovascular disease, like you were mentioning, is a leading cause of death amongst Canadians, and it's remained like that not only in Canada but around the world. And the process that results in cardiovascular disease is called atherosclerosis. That's the plaque buildup. That plaque buildup is not an adult problem, but rather a lifelong problem that starts in childhood and is linked with risk factors. And in a proportion of children, they may have a genetic predisposition to high cholesterol, and specifically something called familial hypercholesterolemia, or FH for short, which is present in about 1 in 300 Canadians. FH is easy to diagnose and it's easy to treat, but unfortunately by our data and best estimates, we're missing about 95% of children with it. And so the purpose of this position statement was to shine a light on this and highlight the need for a systematic approach to diagnosing high cholesterol in children.
And what's that testing process like?
Yeah, it's a rather routine, simple blood test where we check a cholesterol panel. This is a commonly done and inexpensive test that virtually any lab could do.
Is there a downside at all to testing all children, even though it's a fairly rare condition?
And that's a good point. While FH itself, it is actually quite common. 1 in 300 is frequent, especially if we're missing so much. We will likely also, as a result of screening this, find other children with more subtle cholesterol problems where dietary and physical activity recommendations can be reinforced and to help them with lifelong heart-healthy living. And the benefits of finding FH early on and implementing best therapies can really be dramatic across decades. Of course, we don't want kids to experience the discomfort of blood work. We recommend trying to tack this on in an opportunistic manner with other blood work they may be receiving. So if a child is getting, for example, let's say screening for iron deficiency, to add this on as a lab test if it's not been done yet.
Gotcha. So this wouldn't be something that happens in schools or anything. It would be like something when you go see your pediatrician, they would just add this to the regimen of early tests.
Yeah, great question. At this moment, it's not, but certainly one of our large efforts now is looking towards the most effective ways to implement systematic screening strategies. But at this moment, this would be a test done in the context of consultation with your primary care physician.
Do you think it'd be worthwhile of doing a test like that in schools down the road if this is something that takes off?
I think we should collectively explore the most effective strategies to do this, whether it be public health-based testing, pairing it with other routine evaluations or treatments like vaccinations, or school-based testing. All of those things should be explored moving forward.
So if a child is screened and they're found to be positive for FH, what are the treatments like?
Well, in the setting of FH, where the cholesterol levels are severely elevated in a lifelong manner, our first line of defense always is heart healthy living, but often dietary changes and physical activity modifications won't lower the cholesterol sufficiently. And so typically at around the age of 8 to 10, if the levels are severely elevated and it's indicated, we would look towards starting medications to safely lower the cholesterol levels. No, because we have quite good safety data and effectiveness data that starting these medications early on in the setting of FH specifically can dramatically reduce or even normalize cardiovascular risk.
And what kind of dent could this put, say we roll this out across Canada and, we catch all the early cases. What kind of dent could that put in heart disease in Canada and in general?
Thank you for asking that. The FH is clinically silent. That means, if you or I look at each other, we wouldn't know if one of us has it, and specifically in a child, you wouldn't know. And all too often, we first learn about FH after a catastrophic event has happened. So if we find the kids and we implement best therapies from childhood, we can dramatically change that. But not only can we change things for the child, because it's a genetic disease, we can screen off of finding the case in the child and find the affected parents before a catastrophic event happens, and then keep on screening through the family. So we believe that implementing systematic strategies like this can have a very large impact on reducing future cardiovascular risk in this population.
Dr. Khoury, thank you for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. Michael Khoury is a pediatric cardiologist at the Stollery Children's Hospital and an associate professor at the University of Alberta.
Do you agree with me on this? Yes. Wait a minute. Am I talking to myself?
When we debate online, we may as well be talking in an echo chamber. CBC is changing that. Manitoba Talks, a matching software that brings together people with opposing views. Different views, one conversation. Sign up today and challenge your perspective at cbc.ca/MB Talks.
6:20 right now. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio 1. And next here on the show, the latest in our special series of stories produced by filmmaking students in the CREATE program at Sisler High School in collaboration with CBC Manitoba. And this week, CREATE student Katie Ann Tanasiuk shares her own story about her battle with anxiety over things like riding a bus and how she uses art therapy to express her fears and confront them. Here's her story.
There's this huge fleshy lump stuck to you, like kind of on your shoulders, both weighing you down and guiding you, kind of like attached to you in your muscles and your tendons and your thoughts. When I was younger, I didn't really get out of the house much. Most of the stuff I did was at home. Even just going to the store, I kind of had to prepare myself quite a bit. That's how I dealt with it. It was mostly the unknown that freaked me out about it. So that was the best I could do, was prepare for things. One of my biggest fears for a long time was taking the bus. It was such an everyday thing, so I felt like super guilty about it. But it's just something about it was terrifying.
Anxiety is a very normal response. Everyone has anxiety. Anxiety can become a problem when the anxiety system in our body starts to respond when there's no danger there.
I knew I had to take the bus eventually. I couldn't go through life stuck at home just because of my fears. I started from the ground up, going to like friends' houses. Then I started taking a cab alone, and then there came the day that I actually had to take the bus because I had to pick up my grad robes and there was nobody to take me. The more you waited, the more stuck you felt. And the more stuck you felt, the harder it is to kind of pull your feet off the ground, and you know it's going to hurt. Even though it didn't feel like the world was lifted off my shoulders, it felt like this should be my normal. This is getting too normal.
The fear ladder technique is one of the cognitive behavior therapy sections of exposure therapy. So if somebody is afraid of being on a bus, what we do is we try to understand again why they're afraid. Then we create what's a fear ladder, is to say, well, if riding in downtown in the middle of traffic is 10 out of 10 on a scale of 0 to 10 for anxiety, what's 5 out of 10? Basically, if you want to think about it as a training program, that before you get to 5 out of 10, you want to conquer 3 out of 10. What we really try to do is encourage people to incorporate mindfulness activities, yoga, meditation, art therapy, even music, to be in the moment.
Creating art feels like when I get stuck in maybe a state of panic, I know that when I'm making art, I can have a flow. It kind of unsticks me. It's kind of like screaming, but visually. You know, when you really need to get a good scream, but you don't want to worry your neighbors, you do that on like a canvas or on paper. I live very scared, but I know that I can do things that maybe I felt like I wasn't ever going to be able to do. But it's way better than being stuck in that hole. It's living, finally.
Those were the voices of Katie Ann Tanasiuk and you of Manitoba psychiatrist Dr. Jatinder Serene. That story was produced by Sisler Create students Katie Ann Tanasiuk, Jolene Tadarian, Wida Marley, and Chantel Rodriguez with support from CBC Manitoba. And to see that story, which had this really lovely animation of this kind of monster representing anxiety all over Katie Ann's back and legs, it was really, honestly, it was kind of cute. If you want to put it that way, you can go take a look at that, but also very illustrative as well. You can go to our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba. Well, 6:25 right now, and it is March, which means that at the end of the month is the Juno Awards on March 29th, and performing at the Juno Awards this year is William Prince, Manitoba's own. He's a Juno Award winner himself, and we thought we'd talk a little bit about his origins as a musician here in Manitoba. He says that his musical aspirations began accompanying his dad on guitar, because back then his father preached and sang throughout different First Nations communities in Manitoba. He grew up in Peguis First Nation. So this next track kind of brings that to life. This is William Prince with Gospel First Nation on CBC Radio 1.
Jesus just might live down in Fisher Bay, blending in amongst the boats and line. When it comes the winter, nobody seeks the Savior anyhow. He could just hide out past the broken hoops in that old Bible camp. A winding road will lead you to the mount. There's beer cans on the pulpit, clanking like a choir, diamond-covered baggies on the ground. Up there on Gospel First Nation, the highway feels like salvation. In days of childhood, wondered how I would wind up where I am today. Just need to see it for yourself. Does something for your health. If we left right now, I could show you. I swear Jesus just might live alone with all our sins in Fisher Bay, Manitoba. Sure sign of some sinner slapping things in park, leaving their communion scattered in the dark. You could sit for hours and only hear the sound of the trees keeping the lake and sky apart. Me and my old man would drive up to this place, talk about our lives and talk about the stakes. Often he would bring about the time his younger brother drowned, and he was thankful that he only lost his legs. Up there on Gospel First Nation, the highway feels like salvation. In days of childhood, wondered how I would wind up where I am today. Just need to see it for yourself. Does something for your health. If you left right now, I could show you. Oh, Jesus just might live alone with all our sins in Fisher Bay, Manitoba.
That's William Prince with Gospel First Nation. You can catch him later this month. He's going to be performing at the Junos in Hamilton on March 29th. But then after that, he's going to be in Winnipeg, capping off his tour on April 25th at the Centennial Concert Hall. And Boy Golden will be opening for him there as well. That's a concert you won't want to miss. I actually just looked. I think there's about 40 tickets left, actually, on the website. So if you were thinking about it, you may want to scoop them up shortly, because I think they'll be gone pretty soon.
Somewhere like Fisher Bay, Manitoba.
Still to come here on CBC Radio 1, markets have been reacting to the conflict in the Middle East since the U.S. and Iran launched airstrikes. Since the U.S. and Israel launched airstrikes on Iran. We're going to hear how the markets are reacting after your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 6:30, it is -10. It is going to be a mild first Monday of March. Mix of sun and clouds today, a bit of a breeze, and a high this afternoon of -1. Well, dancing in the streets of downtown Winnipeg. A small group of Iranian Winnipeggers celebrating U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran over the weekend, attacks which also killed Iran's supreme leader. Shala Shojai says her thoughts are with loved ones still in her home country.
We love you so much. All of you are my family. I'm happy that soon you will enjoy freedom and prosperity in Iran again.
Now, a different group rallied in Winnipeg, concerned the strikes on Iran are setting a dangerous precedent. About 40 protesters gathered outside the U.S. consulate, arguing the intervention breaches international law. Candice Bodnarek is with Peace Alliance Winnipeg.
We can't start saying that, well, these rules, these enshrined rules under the United Nations apply to certain states, but not these states. Or human rights apply here and not here. And I'm just thinking that, we can't have the Americans and the Israelis going around as the world police.
Under the UN Charter, foreign attacks on another country are only allowed in self-defense or if authorized by the Security Council. Iran is firing more missiles at Israel and other countries around the Middle East. Israel's President Isaac Herzog walking through an area hit by Iranian strikes over the weekend. At least 9 people were killed in the attack on Beit Shemesh. Several others are missing. An Israeli strike in Saudi Arabia started a fire at a state-owned oil refinery. Officials say there's minor damage there. Iran has also launched strikes at cities in the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. The Iranian Red Crescent Society says U.S. and Israeli airstrikes on Iran have killed at least 555 people. It says more than 130 cities have come under attack. The U.S. military says 3 of its service members have been killed and 5 more are seriously injured. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada and India are embarking on a new relationship. He's meeting his counterpart Narendra Modi in New Delhi. Carney says theirs is a valued partnership, one that is about to include new ambitions. This morning, Carney announced a deal worth billions of dollars between India and a Saskatchewan-based company.
The government of India and Cameco have signed a major $2.6 billion uranium supply agreement supporting India's nuclear ambitions and our shared commitment to clean, reliable baseload power.
By 2030, Canada and India expect to double trade to $70 billion a year. It's all part of Canada's push to reduce dependence on the United States. You can hear the latest national and international news coming up on World Report at 7. One person is unaccounted for after a house fire in the Lord Roberts area. The city of Winnipeg says firefighters arrived to heavy smoke and flames when they were called to the 600 block of Nassau Street South around 11:30 Saturday night. It took more than 3 hours for the fire to be declared under control. The house is damaged extensively. Officials were still at the scene yesterday. A Winnipegger who spent years on a wait list for a highly specialized surgery is now on the road to recovery. Daniel McClelland had to get his jaw joints replaced because his lower jaw had partly fused to his skull. Only a handful of surgeons in Canada could perform that procedure. He says after CBC did a story 2 years ago, a Saskatchewan doctor reached out. McClellan says after about 3 years waiting and 2 years of procedures, he now is almost fully healed.
I couldn't open my mouth. Like it was just barely enough to get, milkshake in there. Pretty much I'm almost back to normal. We just kind of align my jaw so I have some screws in my mouth and I'm doing exercises, and it's pretty, we're close.
The province says Manitoban surgeons are able to perform this surgery. They say only 8 people went out of province for this particular procedure over the past 3 years. Well, a third Jets game is decided in overtime.
Barron shoots, and he scores! A perfect shot from Barron, and he gives the Jets the early 1-0 lead.
Morgan Barron in the first period on TSN with what would be Winnipeg's only goal. The Jets lose it in overtime to the hometown San Jose Sharks. 2-1 the final. Coach Scott Arniel says his team missed a few chances.
That was embarrassing. We gave up breakaway, we gave up 3-on-2, and then we gave up a 2-on-1, which became the goal. That's just, if you're trying to gain points, you're on the road, you can't feed it like that. And we fed that, and we just got to be more mindful of that.
The Jets head back now for an 8-game homestand. First up, Chicago tomorrow night. You can find more Manitoba news on our website. Just head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
When you hear the coach say that's embarrassing, that stings. Imagine being a player hearing that too. Oh, brutal.
Yeah. I guess, you know what? There comes a point where that's a word you just have to pull out.
I guess so. Well, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That is Heather Wells at our CBC News Desk. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio 1. I'm Corey Funk, sitting in for Marcy Marcusa, and Abby Adiyemi has been keeping an eye on your weather, which looks, I guess, it's in like a lion up north, but in a bit more like a lamb down south here, isn't it?
Yeah, we're seeing a major split this morning as that yellow extreme cold warning grips the northern part of the province with life-threatening wind chills, while down south we're seeing relatively mild conditions. We're going to see a mix of sun and clouds, but these prolonged wind chills between minus 45 to minus 50 will continue for parts of northern Manitoba towards Churchill, but the focus will be around Tuduli Lake and Brochet this morning, and we see some blizzard-like conditions developing around Churchill, and we are still watching that. If it continues, if the speed builds and stays like that for most of the day, we might be seeing that blizzard hit them around the evening period. But for Winnipeg right now, we're looking at minus 10, partly cloudy outside. Temperatures hover between minus 9 and minus 4. Similar conditions across the southern regions. We're going to see most regions hover to highs between minus 1s and minus 2s, and some might even get to like around Parkland region, we might see minus 8 with a slim chance of light snow there. Up north, we're seeing minus 19s, we're seeing minus 27s, and of course, we're seeing wind chills in the valleys of minus 43 in the Tuduli Lake, in the Lane Lake region this morning. Well, for the Churchill region and around Tuduli Lake, we're seeing wind chills close to minus 45. But overall, it's a day of mild sunshine in the south, and a serious extreme cold will be hitting the northern part of the province. Winnipeg, we are hovering around minus 10 at this time.
Thank you very much, Abby.
Thank you.
That's Abby Adiyemi. Sierra Sanders is also in now with a look at the commute. Hi,
Corey. It's been pretty quiet so far. Commuter line's been pretty Pretty lonely, honestly, in the first hour of the show, but that's okay. So yeah, nothing too major to report, no major backups or any situations getting in your way so far. So things are moving smoothly out there. But if that is not the case and there is something getting in your way or you see something, I'd love to hear about it, whether you are here in the city or anywhere else in the province. Give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number is 204-788-3093.
Thank you very much, Sierra.
Thank you.
6:38 right now, and next here on Information Radio, the situation in the Middle East is changing by the minute after the U.S. and Israel launched airstrikes on Iran over the weekend. Now, most recently, Israel has started strikes on southern Lebanon as well, where Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran, is based. And Israel has even said that all options, including a potential ground invasion of Lebanon, are on the table. And Christelle Ramlakan is here. Christelle Ramlakan is here with the Business Report. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Corey.
So, of course, you've been looking at how the markets have been reacting to the conflict in the Middle East. Can you tell us, what's going on?
Yeah, so the U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran and retaliatory attacks that have followed are rattling the world markets. American futures are falling and oil prices are soaring. Strikes against Israel and U.S. military installations around the Gulf have sent disruptions through the global energy supply chain. So traders have been betting the supply of oil from Iran and elsewhere in the Middle East may slow or even grind to a halt, and attacks throughout the region have restricted countries' ability to export oil to the rest of the world. And energy experts say prolonged attacks will likely result in higher prices for oil and gas, and higher global energy prices could lead to consumers paying more at the pump and more for groceries and other goods at a time when many are already feeling the impacts of elevated inflation. Now, against this backdrop, the OPEC Plus group of oil producers agreed yesterday to raise output more than analysts had been expecting in a meeting planned before the war began. And gains for defense contractors and oil companies have helped limit losses, though, in Asian trading, which has already been open, of course, for the week.
Thank you very much. And next, stranded travelers are scrambling as the war shuts much of the Middle East to air travel. What are the details on that?
Yeah, that's right. So hundreds of thousands of travelers are trying to make new connections and get through to airlines or, through jammed phone lines and online portals. Airports in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha that are shut down, including Dubai International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, are important hubs for travel between Europe, Africa, and Asia. So all three were directly hit by strikes, and about 90,000 people change flights daily in those airports, so they are very busy and important to the region. Dubai-based Emirates has suspended all flights to and from Dubai until at least this afternoon, and about 2,100 flights have been canceled just today to and from airports across the Middle East. And the reverberations are echoing far outside of the Middle East. So, for example, airport authorities in Bali say more than 1,600 tourists were stranded at the airport yesterday after flights to the Middle East were canceled or postponed. And airlines that are crossing the Middle East will have to reroute flights around the conflict. That's going to cause delays and higher costs. Now, Air Canada has suspended flights to Tel Aviv and Dubai. They're allowing free changes and cancellations for flights to, from, and through the region for at least the next couple of weeks. WestJet offering the same for flights to Dubai and Saudi Arabia through today.
And just changing gears here for our final story here, Christelle, why could it be good for brands to embrace negative reviews?
Well, a new study has found sometimes the best course of action may be to embrace negativity instead of denying or ignoring it. So researchers say they were inspired to study the strategy when the NHL team, the Carolina Hurricanes, began selling team merchandise with the slogan, "Bunch of Jerks," after an announcer leveled the insult at the team in 2019 in response to their victory celebrations. So the researchers ran a series of experiments to determine whether claiming or taking back back a negative label could help brands neutralize negative feedback. So researchers showed Facebook users an ad for a fictitious store in which the store either denied or embraced a 1-star review. And the authors found more users clicked on the ad when the store reappropriated an insult in the review. So the researchers believe reappropriation works because it signals confidence and humor. But of course, Corey, it can backfire. So researchers found a brand could risk seeming like a bully if it appropriated a comment from someone that seems vulnerable. And they also found it was unlikely to work if a comment actually pointed out a legitimate issue or moral failing.
Right. I feel, you got to be really surgical with those kind of things.
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk.
Certainly. Well, thank you very much, Crystalie.
Okay, thanks, Corey.
That's Crystalie Ramlakan with your business news. Well, still to come here on Information Radio, we are going to be speaking with a political scientist about the impacts of the attack on Iran and the war in Iran that launched over the weekend. And the most recent development now is that a fourth U.S. military member has died from the attack. And of course, we're still learning about how many civilians in Iran have died as well. That number right now is sitting, at least based off reports from Iranian state media, at around 200 or so, of course, which we know is imperfect as the reports come out from there. 6:44 right now here on Information Radio. But first, there's growing consensus that our oceans play a significant role in our planet's health and the fight against climate change. But not everyone agrees on the path forward for their protection from pollution and exploitation. At the UN, negotiations on a broad plastics treaty have stalled, and that's why some are looking for a solution elsewhere. One such place is in Montreal at the World Ocean Summit happening later this week. And for a closer look at that discussion, I spoke with Josh Loughran. He's the Senior Vice President at Oceania and Executive Director of Oceania Canada. I spoke with him at 6.
Good morning.
So just catch us up on the World Ocean Summit. What is it?
The World Ocean Summit is an annual gathering of some of the largest companies that come together to discuss and come to agreement and recommendations on some of the biggest issues facing our oceans, from shipping to food and increasingly plastic pollution.
So we're going to talk about plastic pollution right away, but what are some of the other kind of overarching key issues up for discussion this week at the summit?
Renewable energy and shipping and other pollution concerns, the sustainable fishing, finance. How do we invest? How do we best set up structures where we get the most out of the ocean? Because increasingly we're realizing how much we are reliant on the oceans for food and commerce. It really underpins the global economy and our health.
And we're obviously learning that a lot this week with oil, for example, in the Strait of Hormuz, right? After the strike in Iran.
For example.
So where are we at with let's just talk about plastics in particular here. So where are we at with the UN's global negotiations on a plastics treaty, and what are the main kind of sticking points?
The discussions are a bit stalled right now. The last negotiations in Geneva ended up without a consensus and with the chair resigning, and now we have a new chair. Really, there's a high ambition bloc, of which Canada, EU, Norway, Latin America, Australia, Japan, South Korea, who are coming together with agreement that we need to get rid of some of the most problematic non-recyclable plastics and get rid of some of the chemicals that are most linked to health concerns, and to invest in the reuse and circular economy. And then there's the low ambition countries that are really trying to make sure we stay focused on things like improving recycling and managing it at the other end of the waste stream, which has proven to be ineffective.
So if the global plastics treaty is stalled, what do you think is possible when it comes to alternative solutions then?
Well, there's lots. What we're looking for is for nations and states and provinces and municipalities to take action. The World Trade Organization has documented over 200 regulations around the world by all its members, Canada banned 6 categories of single-use items in 2019. That got over 30 billion individual items just by Canada putting in place that regulation. 30 billion items taken out of the waste stream. We've got laws in California eliminating some single-use items. We've got France requiring reuse in dine-in establishments. This is where the world is going, and trade partners where Canada is trying to build these trade relationships are increasingly moving there. So that's what we're looking for.
Do you think Canada, does have, the ability to act alone or lead on a cause like this? Like how effective could this be?
Well, when you look at a single regulation getting rid of 30 billion items since 2019, that's a good example of where we can lead and have a real impact on oceans. That's one, and there's more that we can do along those lines. And we won't be leading alone. Those countries who are with whom we want to build relationships are the ones taking action. So this is where the puck is going, and we need to get in front of it.
How concerned are you that nothing could happen, on plastics this week? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, this week really will be where consensus emerges, I think, and where industry and businesses tell governments that they want to see clear rules and a clear roadmap so that they can invest with certainty. So it won't be this week in Montreal that breaks the deadlock, but it will be another call to action. It will be another pressure on countries like Canada to act, because we're seeing it from the business community, and we're also seeing it from individuals. And polling in Canada shows over 80% of Canadians want to see federal action to reduce plastic pollution. I don't remember 80% of Canadians agreeing on anything over the past 30 years. So it's a real sign that people are worried about this and they want to see something done.
Before I let you go here, what else are you going to be watching for from the conference this week?
Are there commitments by companies to invest in reuse and circularity? Is there a call for, a clear call for incentives to be put in place, be that from renewable energy to plastic pollution? And Canada will be there too. So we'll be looking for statements from Canadian governments, hopefully clarifying their plans to act on plastic pollution in the year ahead.
Well, Josh, thanks for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That's Josh Lochran. He's the Senior Vice President at Oceana and Executive Director of Oceana Canada.
The United States has been ripped off.
The stories that matter.
Canada will be responding
as they happen.
We must put Canada first.
At home and around the world.
We don't need the products that they have.
And what they mean to you. For news you can trust.
We're coming to you live.
Stay with CBC News.
6:50 right now. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio, and I'm Corey Funk, sitting in for Marcy Marcusa. The situation in the Middle East is changing by the hour as the fallout from this weekend's joint U.S.-Israel attack on Iran continues. It's now confirmed that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed, and there have been widespread Iranian retaliation strikes against targets across the Gulf region. And so far, the U.S. has confirmed 4 American military deaths, that number going up to 4 just in the last hour or so. It's difficult to get independent verification of death toll reports inside Iran. The world is watching to see what happens next, and so is our next guest. Here to offer his perspective on the situation is Aurel Baran. He's a professor of international relations and political science at the University of Toronto. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what do you make of U.S. President Donald Trump's justification for these attacks on Iran? He says the country was continuing to develop its nuclear program, and that was the main justification. What do you make of that?
Mr. Trump has given shifting explanations. And any time Mr. Trump is involved in any kind of enterprise, we tend to have a kind of visceral reaction because Mr. Trump has a history of bullying, of bombastic rhetoric, and often of not being consistent. And it's so important, consequently, that we don't lose sight of the big picture. The big picture here is that this is not a war against the people of Iran. On the contrary, it is a war against a regime that has brutalized the people of Iran for 47 years. That this is a regime that has made Iran into a rogue state that has violated all the key precepts of international law, that has been the number one supporter of terrorism in the world, that has provided seminal support for Russia, for example. Thousands of killer drones were sent to Russia that have been used to kill Ukrainians and Ukrainian civilians. And we see this regime now flailing and attacking indiscriminately its neighbors, including Oman, which had functioned as, in a way, the regime's lawyer at negotiations, justifying Iran's stances. So this is a regime that has brought terrible tragedy to its own people, great instability to the region. And this is perhaps a small historical window when there may be an opportunity to help the people of Iran who went out by the millions last month to ask for freedom. This was a grassroots movement. They did so at tremendous individual peril. We know that perhaps as many as 40,000 may have been killed by this regime, and they want change. And it is not a top-down attempt, but rather it is whether the international community, not just Mr. Trump, is willing to help the people of Iran, help the region achieve freedom and security.
Well, let's talk about that. So Trump, he's urged the Iranian people to take control of the government. What are the odds that people can actually do that, topple the regime from within it, and form a new government that probably, would, at least from the U.S. perspective, ideally be, democratic?
It is certainly possible that this was a reckless promise, and that would be really, really tragic because the Iranian people may rely on that. You will recall that last month, certainly, Mr. Trump said to the Iranian people that help, it's on the way. And even yesterday, he urged the Iranian people to seize what he called an opportunity to take their country back and declared that America is on your side. And Mr. Trump has history making U-turns, but the Iranian people deserve better than that. And there is so much at stake for them, so much at stake for the people in the region. You can see the Gulf states, for example, that have spent years, decades trying to appease, to contain Iran, now standing up to Iran and issuing a joint statement against Iran, against their indiscriminate bombing. So it is important, consequently, that the international community should become involved in this, not just the bystanders, because so much is at stake. And we're beginning to see a subtle but important shift. You may recall that initially, just a couple of days ago, the EU made these anodyne statements that, there should be maximum efforts to de-escalate, and there should be full support for international law, but nothing more than that. Now, we see that the E3, that is Britain, Germany, and France, are moving to support this action. Britain is allowing the United States to use their military bases in the region for what they call defensive actions. And the German Chancellor has made some really crucial statements, and he is a vital leader of the most important state in Europe in terms of economics and impact. And he differs often very sharply with Mr. Trump, but he said that he recognized the dilemma and that Iran had not stopped trying to acquire nuclear weapons or oppressing their people. And so Mr. Merz said, if I may quote him, so we're not going to be lecturing our partners on their military strikes against Iran. Despite all the doubts, we share many of their aims.
And just before I let you go here, we're calling it a war here at CBC. You're calling it a war, but is that how the U.S. would want it to be seen?
Mr. Trump will use different kinds of terminology. He looks often for political expediency, and this is why he takes so much of the oxygen that it's easy to lose sight of what is at stake. And ultimately, what we have to look for is, will there be real success? And real success will be judged by the following. Will the Iranian people regain their freedom? Will the region achieve stability.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
That's Oral Braun, a political scientist at the University of Toronto. Stay tuned, because coming up at 7:40, we are going to be speaking with a Manitoban Iranian about how they're feeling about what's happening in Iran. Stay tuned for that conversation. But right now, let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines.
Good morning. Yes, and there was dancing and cheering for Iran in downtown Winnipeg yesterday. Iranian Winnipeggers and their supporters celebrating at Portage in Maine after those U.S. and Israeli strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader. We're going to hear from them. A different group also rallied in Winnipeg, concerned the recent strikes are setting a dangerous precedent. About 40 protesters gathered, arguing the intervention breaches international law. I'll be back with those stories and more coming up at 7:30.
Thank you very much, Heather. Also, stay tuned. Coming up this next hour on Information Radio, we're going to hear what weather is in store for Manitoba this March. More of winter, or is spring going to come? We're going to check in with a climatologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Also, as the number of measles cases climbs in Manitoba, we're going to head to the York region in Ontario, where it has mandatory immunization and information sessions for parents who choose not to vaccinate their child. We're going to hear how it works and whether it works coming up at 7:50. I'm Corey Funk, sitting in for Marcy Marcusa. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. Up next, World Report.
Olympic Winter Games Milano Cortina 2026 are almost here, and it all lives on CBC and CBC Gem. Access every Paralympic moment, all for free. With multiple live streams and full replays, CBC Gem puts you in control of the events you want to watch. Get ready for para ice hockey, wheelchair curling, and much more. It all begins March 6th. Watch free on CBC and CBC Gem.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Martina Fitzgerald. Hezbollah and Israel are exchanging heavy fire after Hezbollah launched several strikes from Lebanon.
Hezbollah פתח באש אתמול בלילה.
An Israeli army spokesperson says Hezbollah will pay a heavy price and that all options are on the table, including a ground assault in Lebanon. Hezbollah has been launching its own attacks. The group says it's retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader. The CBC's David Common joins me from Tel Aviv. David, what is the latest between Israel and Lebanon?
This is a new front. It is an expansion of the war, continuing to ripple across the Middle East. What started it depends on who you ask. According to Israel, Hezbollah was the first to fire, launching rockets into the port city of Haifa in Israel. As a response, Israel itself attacked a large number of sites, and this morning is claiming it has killed the head of Hezbollah's intelligence by striking at an address in Beirut. It looks likely that this is going to continue. Hezbollah, of course, an Iranian-backed proxy, and so the airstrikes between these nations is continuing almost as we speak, an ever-growing expansion of this war.
And David, what is the state of the conflict between Israel and Iran?
We know that over the course of the morning, there have been a number of strikes. Israel's military says it is targeting Tehran, and there have been several explosions that have been heard there. We have heard from the Iranian Red Crescent of hundreds of people killed in the 3 days since this began. Of course, there is the girls' school that was seemingly hit. The U.S. military looking into that, but some reports suggest it is almost adjacent to an Iranian Navy base. Perhaps the wrong target was hit, or there was an interception and part of the missile system went into the wrong place. We know that missiles continue to be launched from Iran towards Israel, and that Israel's Iron Dome continues to shoot those down where it can, but it is not always successful. Sometimes weapons get through, and we have seen people killed over the course of the weekend and in recent hours, and the alerts here in Israel continuing. Everybody has a phone that has the alerts, and seemingly every couple of hours the alarm sounds over and over and over, directing people to take shelter.
That is the CBC's David Common in Tel Aviv. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
The Iranian Red Crescent Society says U.S. and Israeli airstrikes on Iran have killed at least 555 people. It says more than 130 cities have come under attack. We expect to hear more from the Trump administration shortly. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is to provide an update this hour. Let's bring in Willie Lowry from our Washington bureau. Willie, what will you be listening for?
Yeah, so Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will provide the first public in-person update on what they're calling Operation Epic Fury. The U.S. has amassed a huge amount of firepower in the Middle East, including 2 carrier groups and the largest aircraft carrier in the world in the USS Gerald R. Ford. Hegseth and Kane will likely be pressed on why Washington started this conflict. The Trump administration briefed some leaders in Congress last week, but they did not seek congressional approval ahead of the strikes. The attack also seemingly goes against much of what President Donald Trump campaigned on, which was an end to the country's forever wars. Last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that Kane and other Pentagon officials warned of the dangers of a long-term military campaign in the region. So I'll be looking for their responses, essentially, to all of those questions.
That is Willie Lowry in Washington. Thank you, Willie.
My pleasure.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is allowing the United States to use British military bases. Starmer says he agreed to the request, but only for what he's calling defensive strikes on Iranian missile sites. The move comes amid reports that a British military base in Cyprus was hit by an Iranian drone. Anna Cunningham has more from London.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, in a video address late Sunday, says the UK is not involved in strikes on Iran, but that the US can use British military bases for defensive strikes.
To prevent Iran firing missiles across the region, killing innocent civilians.
Those military bases are understood to be Fairford in Gloucestershire, England, and Diego Garcia, an archipelago in the Indian Ocean.
The basis of our decision is the collective self-defence.
Some are voicing concern.
We must not get drawn into aggressive acts by the US regime,
says Labour MP John MacDonald.
Britain should be very, very cautious in getting gung-ho behind this American operation.
Warns Rory Stewart, a former British diplomat and ex-politician. Yvette Cooper, the British Foreign Secretary, insists the UK is not being drawn in.
These are not strikes the UK would be themselves involved in.
A British military base on the island of Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri, has been hit by an Iranian drone. Another was shot down. Some 200,000 Brits are in the Middle East.
It is my duty to protect British lives,
says Keir Starmer, as he faces calls to explain to Parliament the legal basis for his decision. Anna Cunningham, CBC News, London.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister is clarifying this country's stance on the Iran conflict.
First and foremost, Canada wasn't involved, we weren't notified, and we do not have an intention to be involved in any military strikes or operation. We share the concern of the United States and many other countries relating to Iranian nuclear proliferation. At the same time, we prefer a diplomatic solution.
Anita Anand was in Delhi this morning as part of Prime Minister Mark Carney's trip to India. He met with his counterpart, Narendra Modi, earlier. They announced billions of dollars in deals and the prospect of a free trade agreement within the year. JP Tasker has more from Delhi.
There has been more engagement between the Canadian and Indian governments in the last year than there has been in more than 2 decades combined.
In Delhi, a diplomatic breakthrough as Prime Minister Mark Carney and his Indian counterpart Narendra Modi sign a flurry of deals on everything from artificial intelligence and farm products to critical minerals and defense. The most lucrative, India will buy some $3 billion worth of uranium over the next 10 years to fuel its nuclear power plants.
This is not merely the renewal of a relationship. It is the expansion of a valued partnership with new ambition, focus, and foresight.
Carney says what's been negotiated heralds a new era of bilateral relations with a country that has been something of a pariah in Ottawa in recent years, after allegations Indian agents were involved in the murder of a Canadian Sikh in BC.
With this partnership, we will advance, we will not stop.
Despite those security concerns, Carney says the two countries have agreed to finalize a free trade agreement by the end of the year. Modi, for his part, is effusive in his praise of Carney, saying the only reason the two countries are on a better footing is because of his leadership. There's a new energy, mutual trust, and positivity, he says, while accepting an invitation from Carney to visit Canada. JP Tasker, CBC News, Delhi.
Canada's planned multi-billion-dollar purchase of new submarines enters a new phase today. This is the deadline for shipyards in Germany and South Korea that are vying for the contract to submit proposals. As Murray Brewster reports, Ottawa's decision will have far-reaching ramifications.
We're down to a single operational submarine.
Vice Admiral Angus Topshee, the commander of the Canadian Navy, on the urgency of acquiring new submarines. Both South Korea's Hanwha Ocean and Germany's TKMS have boats that meet Canada's requirements. With that in mind, federal ministers have focused on economic benefits.
I've been going around talking to various companies inside Canada, understand what it is going to be delivered as part of an economic offset. And so we've heard it loud and clear.
Glenn Copeland is the CEO of Hanwha Ocean Canada. He claims his company's pitch will deliver up to 25,000 jobs in Canada, both directly on the submarine program and through targeted investments in other industries.
In this particular case, it's not just Hanwha, it's the Republic of Korea and the Republic of Korean Navy putting a commitment behind this.
Hyundai Heavy Industries is a partner in the Hanwha bid. The auto giant is considering a massive investment in Canada, including a hydrogen fuel cell innovation hub. TKMS has yet to outline its pitch. Sources tell CBC News both companies have been told to expect a swift decision by the government, perhaps as early as June. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Stockholm.
That is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm Martina Fitzgerald. This is CBC News.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio 1. I'm Corey Funk, sitting in for Marcy Marcusa. Heading for a high today right now in Winnipeg of -1. Coming up this hour on the show, the Supreme Leader of Iran is dead, and this comes after an attack from the U.S. and Israel. We're going to get a local voice on this global story. We're going to chat with a Manitoban Iranian who says he is optimistic, cautiously optimistic about what's happening there. We're going to get more on that. Also, as the number of measles cases climbs in Manitoba, we're going to head to York Region in Ontario, where it has mandatory immunization and information sessions for parents who choose not to vaccinate their child. We're going to hear how it works and whether it works coming up later this hour. But first, here on Information Radio, we're going to talk with a climatologist from from Climate Change Environment Canada about the March forecast here in Manitoba. But first, let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines.
Good morning. Well, one person is unaccounted for after a house fire in the Lord Roberts area. The city says firefighters arrived to heavy smoke and flames when they were called to the 600 block of Nassau Street South around 11:30 Saturday night. It took more than 3 hours for that fire to be declared under control. A Winnipegger who spent years on a wait list for a highly specialized surgery is now on the road to recovery. Daniel McClellan had to get his jaw joints replaced because his lower jaw had partially fused to his skull. Only a handful of surgeons in Canada could perform that procedure. We're going to hear his story coming up in our next local news at 7:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That is Heather Wells at our CBC News desk. And right now, speaking live is U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. He is giving an update on the military operation in Iran. We're going to take you there live right now to CBC Newsnet. Have a listen.
Of America. May we prosecute the remainder of this operation in a manner that honors them. No apologies, no hesitation, epic fury for them and the thousands of Americans before them taken too soon by Iranian radicals. Before I turn it over to General Kane for the operational update, let me speak straight to you, the Joint Force, our warriors on the front lines. This is your moment. This is the generational turning point America has waited for since 1979, and since the rudderless wars of hubris my generation, our generation, endured. Don't listen to the noise. Just stay focused. Our commander-in-chief is steady at the wheel. We face a determined enemy, but you are better. But we must prove it every single day. History doesn't care if we're tired, if we're scared, or if the fight feels big. It demands warriors who rise anyway. Peace through strength, the warrior ethos, lethality, unity of purpose, those are not slogans. They're the beating heart of what it means to wear the uniform, that uniform. You think clearly under fire, you act decisively in chaos, you uphold the Constitution, and you uphold our country without hesitation. We are not defenders anymore.
That is U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth speaking live right now. You can, if you want to see more of what he has to say right now, you can go to CBC News Net. He is speaking live right now in Washington. But right now, let's just take a quick look at your forecast here in Winnipeg. Abby Adeyemi is in right now with a look.
Yeah, we're looking at tales of two seasons. The southern part of the province, we're waking up to milder conditions. We're talking about temperatures around -10s, -11 across the southern regions. And we'll see daytime temperature hover between -9 and -4. Most of the regions will hit -1 later today. While up north, we're still seeing that extreme wind chill, hence the extreme cold warning in effect for regions around Tuduli Lake and Brochet this morning.
$7:14 right now, and apologies, I said that the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, was speaking in Washington. He's actually speaking in Arlington, Virginia, live right now. You can see it on CBC News Net. Also, if you see anything going on the commute right now, you can give us a call, 204-788-3093. Haven't heard of any major issues going on right now. You can give Sierra a call. Well, up next here on CBC Radio 1, here's a deep philosophical question for you. Is March more of a spring month or a winter month? Every year, March comes along and keeps Manitobans on their toes. Sorels, rubber boots, sandals. Everything is on the table. And to tell us what we can expect weather-wise this month, we've reached David Phillips. He's a climatologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Corey. Thank you for inviting me aboard. You described that so well. It's like a transition. We know it's a new month, and for us in Environment Canada, it's a new season. We put March often in the spring column. It doesn't mean that winter weather is over. No, and we don't see this year a rush to spring. But and you know, I mean, when you face it, sometimes in March it can be sometimes even much more winter-like than the winter in terms of snow. I mean, you still on average, Corey, if you look at the last, it's not a forecast I'm giving you. It's a what you'd see over the next, say, based on the last 30 years. What could you expect in, say, snowfall in March, April, and May? So that period. Well, you could still get about 30% of your annual snowfall yet to fall, maybe 12 days of snow. And we often see, too, these Colorado lows. My gosh, 60 years ago, right about this time, we got this incredible storm, the worst blizzard in Winnipeg's history, 38 centimeters of snow. Don't want to remind you of that, but we know that winter weather is not sort of over with. It's kind of a transition season, so we're going to see some melting, some thawing, but then it's going to be a return to kind of winter-like weather until we get out of March and more into April and May. So March we're seeing right now, Corey, in terms of our forecast, we're showing it to be a little kind of near normal to warmer than normal in the southern part of the province, but colder than normal in the central Manitoba Lakes area, and then in northern Manitoba, we still see winter hanging on for another month or so.
Okay, so and what about the spring in general? If we look, I know as we get further ahead, it gets a little less accurate, hard to tell. But if we're looking ahead to spring, I'm sure Manitobans are wondering.
Well, Corey, you're right about that. I mean, the farther you look out, the more inaccurate you are. But we clearly know that days are getting longer. You can't deny that. I mean, there's 3.5 minutes every day is more daylight. The angle of the sun's very important. It is that sun is right now about 32 degrees above the horizon, so it doesn't have as much atmosphere to go through as it would have in, say, January, February. So when you're walking along the streets of Winnipeg or Brandon, anywhere, you can feel that heat. You actually feel that warmth, as long as there's no wind chill. And so we clearly see, and by the first day of astronomical day of spring, which would be, say, in 3 weeks from now, the angle is going to be about 41 degrees, 42 degrees. So it's really going in the right direction. So that's an important point. But the point is, though, what we have to do, Corey, I often say there's no connection between one season and the next, except from winter to spring. And until you get spring, you've got to get rid of the look and the feel of winter. You've got to melt that snow. You've got to thaw out the ground. And then when that warmth comes, it doesn't just go melt the snow. It actually warms the air and the ground, and you actually feel that. So my sense is that, hey, we still have some winter-like weather. It's going to be kind of fickle and fitful. You know, it's not going to be 3 weeks of, oh, my gosh, polar vortex. It might be 3 days of cold. And then you'll be back in the melting. It's backing and thawing, and it's good for the flood season, too, because what you want to do, you don't want to rush to spring. You don't want to get rid of all that winter look, and then you're going to end up with too much water in a short period of time. So you kind of want to ease into it. So my sense is that, hey, we still have winter. You can't put away the polar fleece or the shovel yet, but it's heading in the right direction.
And before I let you go here, Dave, can you just put this winter that we've just had? Yeah. I like to think, I know spring isn't officially until March, but it feels like now it's March 1st, so like we're kind of in spring mode.
Yes.
I want to look back at the winter, like comparatively to winters past. Has this been a good winter, bad winter, or normal winter?
Well, Corey, it was actually, it kind of two bookends. We had November. I mean, first of all, when we entered winter, it was one of the warmest falls on record. I mean, you were shocked when winter came because you weren't expecting it. I mean, it was absolutely September, October, and March, and September, October, and November were actually the warmest in Manitoba's history.
Wow.
In 80 years, never seen a warmer one. So then when winter arrived, and it did really with a big bang there in December. December was really, really cold, and then but November was actually warm. So the first month of kind of winter was really good, and the last month, February, was about 3 degrees warmer than normal. We had about 9 days where the temperature got below -20, often a mark of a cold day. We normally get about 14. We had no days below -30, and we normally get 3 of those. So I think there was a warm period there. It started off cold in February. It ended up kind of cold, but in between you had a good kind of a thawing and melting kind of a period. So my sense, Corey, you won't remember this winter. There was nothing unusual about this winter. It was actually overall, I would say it's been a little bit warmer than normal because December and January were slightly cooler, but really dominated by the warm November and the warm February.
Well, Dave, we'll leave it there. We'll have to check in again when spring comes to see how accurate you were.
Okay. I look forward to that, Corey. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. That's David Phillips. He's a climatologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada.
Do you agree with me on this? Yes. Wait a minute. Am I talking to myself?
When we debate online, we may as well be talking in an echo chamber. CBC is changing that. Manitoba Talks, a matching software that brings together people with opposing views. Different views, one conversation. Sign up today and challenge your perspective at cbc.ca/mbtalks.
7:21 right now. Sports is just ahead, but first, we got a little bit of time for some music. How about a little country for you? Acclaimed Franco-Manitoban singer-songwriter Jocelyn Baribeau is back with a country-tinged folk sound. Fresh off a residency at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa and tour dates in Quebec, she returns home to celebrate her new album produced by Murray Pulver and Annick Granger. She performs at Bell's Kitchen and Music Hall tonight. Here's a little track. This is 200 Acres.
Le blé fait le blé, lever soleil, lever l'amour, fait l'amour. Quand c'est à l'été, se coller les côtés, l'amour, l'amour. sur le perron pour se bercer, pour se bercer. Pleuvoir fait croire et l'espoir fait l'espoir. L'amour fait l'amour. Mon rire te fait rire et te voir pleurer me fait jurer que tant que je respire, le pire ne pourra jamais noyer. 200 acres à semer, nos mains enlacées et deux chaises sur le perron pour se bercer, pour se bercer. Mes yeux en feu, à force de t'allumer, l'amour fait l'amour. Ton courage m'encourage, ma peur te fait braver. Jurer que tant que l'on respire, le pire ne pourra jamais brûler. 200 acres à semer, nos vies enlacées, deux hommes enracinés, nos corps fatigués. 200 acres à semer, et deux chaises sur le perron pour se bercer, pour se bercer, pour se bercer.
That's Franco-Manitoban singer-songwriter Jocelyn Baribeau with 200 acres, or 200 acres. 7:25 right now. It's time for morning sports with Scott Reguera. Good morning.
Hey, Corey.
So let's start with curling, where there's some familiar names atop the standings at the Brier.
There are. The three skips who've started the Bonspiel 3-0, Corey, are Kevin Cooey and the Brads, Jacobs and Gushu. Between them, they've won a dozen national titles, 3 world championships, and 3 Olympic gold medals to boot. So curling royalty, although it is hometown hero Gushu who's received the lion's share of support so far in St. John's. That is partly down to his stellar career, which includes winning the Brier the last time it was held in the city, but it is also because Gushu is retiring at the end of this season, something his heir apparent in the province is well aware of. That's Newfoundland and Labrador skip Nathan Young.
I told my work, I said, I'm going to be in St. John's for the Brier, whether we're playing or not. And now it's pretty cool that we get to play. In 2017, the Brier was here last, and many players on the ice today were inspired because of that moment. It's pretty surreal to be playing here now, this being a St. John's Brier, this being Brad Gushu's last Brier, so we can't wait.
Yeah, Young doesn't have to wait very much longer to face his idol Gushu. They match up this evening at 5 Central Time, and Young's got a nice start going at the Brier, off to a 2-1 start at this Bonspiel. Also, as far as Manitoba teams are concerned, and pretty good Sunday. Braden Calvert thumped the NWT 12-5 to even his record at 1, and Matt Dunstone remains perfect so far. He beat BC 9-4, so Dunstone sitting at 2-0.
To smoother ice now, but maybe not so smooth of a situation with the Jets. They're on a bit of a losing streak.
Yes, they are. A 2-1 defeat in OT to the San Jose Sharks for the second game in a row, Corey. Winnipeg had a third period lead only to squander it. Adding insult to injury, it was the Jets' top line that gave the puck away on the tying goal. Head coach Scott O'Neill was not mincing words in his assessment.
That start to the third period, our first 3 shifts, for our veteran group to let that happen, that was embarrassing. If you're trying to gain points, you're on the road, you can't feed it like that. And we fed that, and we just got to be more mindful of that. And I really believe that should have been a 6 for 6 points on the road trip. But at the end of the day, we got to go home and take care of business now.
Very frustrated Coach Arneal there. With this latest loss, Corey, Winnipeg is now 9 points out of a playoff spot. The trade deadline's Friday, so will we see the last of some names as Jets? Logan Stanley, Luke Shen, Gustav Nyquist, they're all among players on expiring contracts. So we'll see. Winnipeg back in action at home tomorrow. That game's against Chicago.
Okay. Well, meanwhile, in soccer, there's also lots going on right now with Canada's men's and women's teams.
There is, including the ongoing battle, Corey, to see who's going to play in net for the World Cup. Canada's top two candidates faced off last night in an MLS match. Dane St. Clair in Miami against Maxime Crepeau in Orlando, and it's pretty safe to say neither of them shone. It ended a 4-2 victory for Miami. So if you didn't get enough of goaltending controversies in hockey during the Olympics, here's one in footy for you. Meanwhile, Canada's women's team, no goalie questions for them. Kaylin Sheridan's entrenched as the number one. Their concerns, though, involve goal scoring. Heading into their match yesterday against Colombia at the She Believes Cup, the Canadians were on a 5-game losing skid in which they didn't score a single goal. A relief then for Coach Casey Stoney after Canada beat Colombia 4-1.
Listen, overwhelmingly pleased for the players and the team. They needed this win to build confidence, to build belief, to show everybody that's been doubting them that there's still a team in there that's still very good. I've never doubted that, but I think on the outside they've been doubted, and I think they've proved a few people wrong, but we're also a realist, right? The next game is the next level.
Yeah, that next game is against the U.S. in Columbus on Wednesday, Corey. Canada's all-time record against the Americans, 4 wins, 7 draws, 53 losses. Maybe so, but we will always have that gold medal from Tokyo.
Well, thank you very much, Scott.
You betcha.
That is Scott Regehr with your morning sports. 7:29 right now here on Information Radio. And stay tuned. Coming up this next hour on the show, measles cases in Manitoba continue to skyrocket with over 80% of the cases involving people who haven't been vaccinated. So we're going to hear from an Ontario doctor about mandatory information sessions when families decide not to vaccinate. That's what they do there. But does it work? We're going to speak with them about that. Also, we're going to get an update from an Iranian Manitoban who, of course, has been watching the developments following the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran over the weekend. We're going to have all that coming up after your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30, it is -10. A mix of sun and clouds for the first Monday of March in Winnipeg, and we will be flirting with melting, a high today of -1. We begin in the Middle East as Hezbollah and Israel exchange heavy fire after Hezbollah launched several strikes from Lebanon.
Hezbollah פתח באש אתמול בלילה.
An Israeli army spokesperson says Hezbollah will pay a heavy price, and all options are on the table, including a ground assault in Lebanon. Hezbollah has been launching its own attacks. The group says it's in retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader. The Iranian Red Crescent says more than 550 people have been killed since the U.S. and Israel launched their attack on Iran. The U.S. military now says a 4th service member has died from injuries suffered during the weekend strikes. Now, here in downtown Winnipeg, there was dancing and cheering for Iran. Iranian Winnipeggers and supporters celebrating at Portage in Maine after those airstrikes. Shala Shojai says she was proud to be celebrating in Winnipeg as people in Iran were also dancing and cheering.
Iranian congratulations to each other for the death of Khamenei, the dictator, and for the death of the other people who their hand was has blood of our innocent people in their hands.
Now, a Winnipeg assistant professor argues the strikes on Iran by the U.S. and Israel are a breach of international law. University of Manitoba's Nathan Dureko says the United Nations only excuses attacks on a foreign country for self-defense or if approved by the Security Council. He says neither bar was met even after years of Iranian government oppression.
The oppression in Iran and the suppression of human rights and that is a huge concern to everyone, but it doesn't provide a legal basis for a military intervention. And if it did, where does that stop? Where would that leave us?
You can hear the latest on what is happening as the story continues to develop in the Middle East. That's coming up on World Report at 8. Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada and India are embarking on a new relationship. He's meeting his counterpart Narendra Modi in New Delhi. Carney says theirs is a valued partnership, one that's about to include new ambitions. This morning, Carney announced a deal worth billions between India and a Saskatchewan-based company.
The government of India and Cameco have signed a major $2.6 billion uranium supply agreement supporting India's nuclear ambitions and our shared commitment to clean, reliable baseload power.
By 2030, Canada and India expect to double trade to $70 billion a year. It's all part of the Canadian government's push to reduce dependence on the United States. One person is unaccounted for after a house fire in the Lord Roberts area. The city of Winnipeg says firefighters arrived to heavy smoke and flames when they were called to the 600 block of Nassau Street South. That was around 11:30 Saturday night. It took more than 3 hours for that fire to be declared under control. The house sustained extensive damage. A Winnipegger who spent years on a surgery wait list is now able to eat solid food again. Daniel McClellan was told he needed a highly specialized jaw surgery in 2021. He says it was only after CBC News did a story on him 2 years ago that a Saskatchewan doctor reached out. McClellan says the wait was unreasonable.
I was waiting like 3 years. I was getting no information. They said the only guy who could do it was in Toronto. This boils down to not doing your homework or bureaucratic mess. I don't even know what to describe it.
McClellan says he is no longer in chronic pain and no longer restricted to pureed food and smoothies. He still has to do some jaw alignment exercises, but should be fully healed in a few weeks. The Winnipeg Jets drop another game in overtime.
Barron shoots, and he scores!
Morgan Barron in the first period there on TSN with what would be Winnipeg's only goal. The Jets lose 2-1 in OT to the Sharks in San Jose. Jets head coach Scott Arniel wasn't mincing his words after the loss, saying to have a team who was elite players perform the way they did in the third period was embarrassing. Asked what the difference is between the Jets of last year and this year?
Personnel. Personnel has a lot to do with it.
Well, the Jets head back now for an 8-game homestand, and first up, Chicago tomorrow night. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
If that's what he's telling media, just imagine the kind of conversations he's having in the locker room, eh?
It would be very interesting to hear.
Oh, man. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That is Heather Wells at our CBC News desk. 7:35 right now. I'm Corey Funk sitting in for Marcy Marcusa. And Abby Adiemi has an eye on your regional forecast. Hi there.
Yeah, hi, Corey. We're still tracking that extreme cold warning that remains in effect for northern Manitoba this morning as that prolonged period of dangerous wind chills between the values of -45, tracking it even into the values of -50 grips the region. We're tracking it into Brochet to Dill Lake this morning, while Churchill still faces that near blizzard-like condition for that region with the wind chill just around -43. But across the province, the south will definitely be enjoying a mix of sun and clouds with temperatures just near the freezing mark, while the north is locked in that really life-threatening cold and some regions getting blowing snow as we speak. For Winnipeg right now, we're looking at temperatures around -11, partly cloudy outside. Morning temperatures hover between -9 and -4. We're looking for a mix of sun and clouds today with some breezy conditions from the south, and that's going to be shifting northwest as we get into the afternoon. That warm stays up, and we'll see temperatures get to about -1 later. Tonight remains mainly cloudy. For the Pembina Valley region, modern surrounding environment, we're seeing temperatures sitting around -10 at this time. Expecting a sunny day, also warming up to -1. Brandon towards Nipper, we're looking at -16 at this time. That region gets to -2. In the Parkland region, Dauphin currently sitting around -5. Cloudy conditions now. You see your temperatures around -8 later. There's a slim chance of light snow in the forecast. Gimli's at -9, some clouds, breezy conditions off the lake. You warm come up to about -3. Then tracking it into the northern region, where we're seeing temperatures between -10 and -23 at this time. The power, we're looking at -17 at this time. You stay there for most of the day. The wind chill around -28. Thompson at -21. It feels like -34. Around Gillam, we're seeing drifting snow at -16. Wind chill around -38. Lynn Lake -28. It feels like -43. Tudula Lake, we're seeing light snow there. There we have that warning in effect. The wind chill feels like -46 this morning. While in Churchill, we have ice crystals with near blizzard conditions developing, and we see temperatures around -23 at this time, but the wind chill close to -44. So overall, there's a split. The south kind of manageable, but up north, it's more like dangerously cold for our regions as we track it towards Churchill this morning. Winnipeg, cloudy, -11.
Thank you very much, Abby.
Thank you.
That's Abby Adiyemi. Sierra Sanders is in with a look at the commute. Hello.
Good morning, Corey. Been pretty quiet on the commuter line this morning, not hearing about much on the roads today here in the city or out on the highways. The highways are also looking pretty clear this morning, especially after last week's little snowstorm that we had there. But Winnipeg Traffic Management is reporting a stalled vehicle in the northbound curb lane at Kenniston and Grant. So a stalled vehicle in the northbound curb lane at Kenniston and Grant. You want to keep left to pass there. But that's about it. So far, it sounds like a pretty smooth commute this fine first Monday of March, I guess we could classify it as. But still some time left in the show. So give me a call on the CBC commuter line if there is something that gets in your way. 204-788-3093.
Thank you very much, Sierra. That's Sierra Sanders, our studio director, keeping an eye on the commute. Well, next up here on Information Radio, as you've been hearing in the news, the United States and Israel attacked Iran over the weekend, leaving the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei dead. The death toll in Iran is at least 555 people, according to the Iranian Red Crescent Society. 4 U.S. military soldiers have also died. And just this past hour, General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, says the U.S. expects additional losses. This has left many Manitobans with mixed emotions. And yesterday, there was a rally against the U.S. and Israeli intervention at Portage in Maine. This is what the organizer, Candace Bodnaruck, had to say.
We felt that we had to come out and make a statement, against this. I mean, meanwhile, we see people around the world praising this. That is highly troubling and unquestionable. Luckily, there are countries that have condemned this, but yeah, there's too many who seem to think that international law is an option.
That's what Candace Bodnaruck told CBC. She helped organize a rally against the strike in Iran. An hour later, at the same intersection at Portage in Maine, there was a protest in support of the intervention. That's what Shala Shojahi told CBC.
Iranian congratulations to each other for the death of Khamenei, the dictator, and for the death of the other people who has blood of our innocent people in their hands. By bottom of my heart, I couldn't believe that he really died. And I hope that it's true news and people get rid of this brutal regime soon.
That was Shahla Shojahi telling CBC about her reaction to what's happening in Iran. Courage Dostshonas left the country when he was 19 years old, and now he lives in Manitoba and is an advocate for Iranian civilians. He's also the president and founder of the Association of Families of Flight PS752 victims, and he joins us over Zoom. Hello there, Courage.
Yes, good morning.
So how are you feeling right now as you watch what's happening in Iran?
Well, it's cautiously optimistic for the future. Of course, when the bombs flying and casualty could mount up, and who knows, nobody can exactly say how this will turn out. And that's the reason there's a cautious optimism. If this finished early and with the least number of casualties, and this also turn to the more democratic future for Iran, there is really hope. But if this continues for days and days and more people killed, and at the end of it, the regime stays in power, then it will be a very sad situation.
I want to speak about that actually. So Trump, he kind of said essentially, Iranians take over your government. What do you make of that statement? And do you think that's something that Iranians can do?
Well, I mean, one would hope to do that because I'm sure President Trump and others, they're fully aware they may not be able to win this war just by air power. At the end of the day, you need a boot on the ground. And of course, they are not going to be sending soldiers to die to topple the regime. So that's why they're asking the unarmed civilians in Iran to take over and topple the regime with their help while they're doing the bombing. But again, the problem is the regime infrastructures and all the forces are still intact and they're fully armed and ready to continue the massacre. As we saw on January 8 and 9, they killed upward of 40,000 people and injured thousands of people, others like killing and injuring and detained so many people who knows what's happening to them, and they continued the execution meanwhile.
You have family in Iran. What have you been hearing from them, if anything?
It's very little. Whenever just between the massacre of January and now, there were sporadic connections, and people were calling in and out for a few days. Now again, it's about 90+% of blackout. There's a very, very little possibility of having any conversation with people inside Iran at the moment.
And what do you make of how Canadian officials have responded to this as an Iranian, but also someone who lives here in Canada? We've heard from Carney, Prime Minister Carney, as well as Anita Anand, with a joint statement saying that they do support taking out Iran's capability to obtain or develop nuclear weapons. But that's pretty much the gist of what they've said. What do you make of the way Canadian officials have responded to this so far? Well, I believe you're on mute there, Kurosh.
Oh, okay. I believe I saw the statement, the joint statement that it came out, and I fully agree with it because Canada is one of the first countries in the world who listed IRGC as a terrorist organization, and they cut the diplomatic ties since 2012 after another Canadian was killed. That was Sarah Kazemi. And of course, the past 6 years, myself as a spokesperson and the board member of the Families Association, they've been in constant contact with the government of Canada, and we appreciate all the cooperation we got from them because, we have two legal cases in International Court of Justice against Iranian regime. And also on the January 6th, Minister Anand, in the conversation with the families of victims of Flight PS752, reassured families, regardless of what happens to the regime, whether it's toppled or not, those legal court cases will be on and will continue, because at the end of the day, we have to find the truth and get some sort of a justice.
Trump says this war could last for at least another couple of weeks. We just heard, as you mentioned, that the U.S. does expect potentially more U.S. soldiers to die in this war, so they are willing to continue it. What are your concerns as the U.S. and Israel continue this offensive in Iran?
Well, when I hear the statements like that, of course, vast majority of people of Iran, they are happy to see the dictator is dead, and some of the criminal, like head of the IRGCs and others, are killed. But at the same time, the structure of the IRGC and the regime stays in place. And when President Trump announces, it could continue for a few more weeks, I don't believe anyone knows how long it's going to take. Because the way this regime is, they have nowhere to go. They are not going to be capitulating. They're going to be fighting to the bitter end. and that means more and more people will be killed. And they're lashing out against the Iranian unarmed civilians and also the neighbors. So this really, really can cause carnage at the very unimaginable dimensions.
And the most recent development, just in this last hour or so, Pete Hegseth, U.S. Secretary of War, he confirmed there's no U.S. boots on the ground, but he said actually he wouldn't rule it out in the future. If the U.S. does put soldiers on the ground, how would that change your perspective of this conflict as someone with close ties to Iran?
Well, if you remember, we have seen this in the past. They call it mission creep. They start with some starting point, and then as the things may not go according to the original plan, then this thing can evolve into even introducing the land forces and all other options. And the problem is, as soon as more U.S. soldiers become a casualty of this war, then they will be in much more pressure to somehow limit the casualties, because for the domestic politics, the U.S. cannot really offer to continue having more casualties. So as a result, they will depending on more brutal force. And if in the situation like that, the chances of civilians getting really killed and injured, it become increasingly higher and higher.
So at this point, it sounds like overall you're cautiously optimistic. These initial strikes sounds like something, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you initially support. How much do you trust the U.S. operation will continue, and how long will they have your support?
Well, to be honest with you, I am very ambivalent. At one hand, I am happy to see the end of this dictatorship by any means, but also what they are doing at the moment. But at the same time, what is going to replacing it become even much more important things to keep in mind, because usually the foreign interference, it can topple the regime, but it's been a very, very poor record on what they replace the initial dictatorship after the military actions. And right now, the signs are not very good and for what's going to happen after. And longer it takes for the regime to be dismantled, the danger of that become more evident.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Courage, thanks for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you kindly. Appreciate your time.
Courage Dushtanas is the president and founder of the Association of Families of Flight PS752 victims. He lives here in Manitoba, moved here from Iran when he was 19. Stay up to date with this story. You can visit cbc.ca/Manitoba. 7:50 right now. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio 1. Right now in Winnipeg at the Forks, we're sitting at -10, heading for a high today, mix of sun and cloud of -1. Well, measles cases continue to soar in Manitoba. As of February 21st, there were 139 confirmed cases in the province, and according to provincial data, 84.1% of positive cases involved people with no doses of the measles vaccine. Manitoba mandated childhood vaccines in 1985 under the Public Schools Act, but in 1999, the requirement was repealed. It leaves Ontario and New Brunswick as the only provinces requiring proof of vaccination for children attending school. And in Ontario, if parents decide not to vaccinate their child, they must attend a mandatory education session on vaccinations. And one of the regions offering those sessions is the regional municipality of York. And Dr. Sarah Erdman is the Associate Medical Officer of Health for the region. She joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So walk us through this process. So, when a parent says, no, I don't want my child vaccinated to go to school, what happens after that, between that and attending one of these sessions?
Sure. Well, first I'd like to start with, my empathy and sympathy is with affected measles outbreak. We had a very large one in Ontario last year, and so I know how difficult it can be. In Ontario, under the Immunization of School Pupils Act, parents are required to submit proof of their child's vaccination for certain vaccines, including measles, that are required for school attendance. And if they don't submit that, they can submit a philosophical exemption or a medical exemption. And so to get the philosophical exemption, they have to attend, like you said, these mandatory educational sessions that are required under the law by the Ministry of Health, and they're put on by the Ministry of Health. And our local public health unit is one of the health units in Ontario that administers this program.
And what does that program look like in terms of those sessions?
Yeah, so the purpose of requiring these educational sessions is to ensure that parents are making decisions around vaccination with accurate and up-to-date information about vaccine preventable diseases, vaccine safety, and the potential impact on their child and the broader community of not vaccinating their children. And so, vaccination decisions affect individual children, but as we see in an outbreak, they also affect their classmates and the communities, infants too young to be vaccinated and people who are immunocompromised. And so what's taught in these education sessions is how vaccines work, how they're tested, how they're monitored for safety, why they're required for school entry, what diseases they protect against, like measles. It covers some of the common myths and misinformation around vaccine preventable diseases and the complications of them, as well as the safety of vaccination. And what can happen during an outbreak, including being excluded from school if you are unvaccinated.
And I guess ultimately the goal of these sessions is to, change their mind to get their child vaccinated. How effective have those sessions been? Do you have any data on that?
We don't have any recent COVID. We have switched to online delivery of the immunization sessions. The goal really is respectful dialogue. Parents are encouraged to ask questions, express concerns, and receive credible scientific information in a non-judgmental setting. Offering these education experiences is important, even if they're not required. And ideally, the education is proactive. I don't know, in terms of what we're hearing from parents and participants after a session is mixed. Obviously, a lot of people who attend the sessions already have their minds made up. And so those are challenging conversations to have sometimes, especially when they feel kind of coerced into attending the sessions. But ideally, having, it doesn't eliminate hesitancy, but having that respectful, direct conversation with the aim of improving knowledge can change, in some cases, vaccine decisions. We don't have a lot of evidence from our experience that it has been incredibly effective, only because I think we're reaching people that are already often have their minds made up, unfortunately.
What about the mandate in general? Like, we don't have that here where to go to school, you have to be vaccinated. What difference have you noticed in terms of just having that mandate in place has made in terms of for vaccination rates?
Yeah, I think it's very effective in terms of vaccination rates and in ensuring people are reminded to stay up to date for their children and the importance of vaccination. I think we see that in many U.S. states as well that have mandatory vaccination rates, that the vaccination rates are extremely high. And so I do think that is very effective. It's a challenging conversation to have post-COVID. We've seen some increase in the philosophical exemption rates here in York Region and in Ontario more broadly. But in general, the vast majority of people are very supportive of vaccination. And this is just a reminder to ensure your child is up to date if they haven't received vaccination. And the importance, really reinforcing the importance of that to keep our community safe.
Based on what you've seen of the program, do you think is this kind of mandated public education for philosophical exemptions could be something that should be rolled out across the country, or is something that just happens to or should just stick around in Ontario?
I can't speak for the broader country. It's been a policy in Ontario for almost a decade. I think since it came in 2018, if I'm mistaken. The relative effectiveness of it is, like I said, is kind of mixed, but I think it's an important opportunity for dialogue, for parents to ask questions and receive answers from a credible source.
Well, Dr. Erdman, we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Dr. Sarah Erdman is the Associate Medical Officer of Health for the Regional Municipality of York. And for up-to-date measles information in Manitoba, you can head to gov.mb.ca. Let's take a quick look at news headlines now with Heather Wells.
Good morning. Well, there was dancing in the streets of downtown Winnipeg yesterday. A group of Iranian Winnipeggers celebrating U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran over the weekend. Meanwhile, another group was also protesting yesterday, concerned the recent strikes are setting a dangerous precedent and breach international law. And one person is unaccounted for after a house fire in the 600 block of Nassau Street South. That fire happened late Saturday night. We'll hear more Manitoba News coming up at 8:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
Stay tuned here on Information Radio. Where'd my tip go? That's what servers across Canada are wondering after money went missing from a tip app used by restaurants. We're going to hear from an industry expert about the impact that's had since the Bank of Canada has stopped some of those third-party apps from operating and the impact that's had on restaurants. That's coming up after World Report. Stay tuned.
On Q.
I'm Garvey Bailey in for Tom Power. After taking a decade-long break from music, Hilary Duff is back with a new album, which dives into the messy, vulnerable parts of life in her late 30s. She's here to talk about finally feeling ready to open up on this record and reflect on her early days as a child star.
I only want the beginning, I don't want the end. Want the part where you
Q,
say that.
this morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on CBC Listen, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your home, your neighborhood, your town, city, community, your country, your world, your news, your world tonight, every night, 7 days a week on CBC Radio 1, on demand on the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Martina Fitzgerald.
We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth speaking at the Pentagon this morning. He accuses Iran of waging a one-sided war against America for 47 years. Hegseth says Tehran was given every opportunity to make a nuclear deal, and he laid out the U.S. mission in Iran.
Destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy and other security infrastructure, and they will never have nuclear weapons. We're hitting them surgically, overwhelmingly, and unapologetically.
Hegseth says the United States is setting the terms of this war. 4 American military members were killed in the initial attack on Iran, dubbed Operation Epic Fury. Hegseth called them the absolute best of America. Meanwhile, the Iranian Red Crescent says more than 550 people have been killed in that country. Air raid sirens ring out across Jerusalem and Tel Aviv as Iran continues to fire back. Iran's capital has been hit with another round of Israeli strikes. Several explosions have been heard in Tehran. But with widespread internet outages and most media refused entry, it's difficult to get a clear picture of what's unfolding on the ground. The CBC's Briar Stewart is in neighboring Turkey with the latest.
At the Kapakoy border crossing between Turkey and Iran, hundreds of people go back and forth over the border, which cuts through a remote swath of mountainous terrain. Heading back into Iran, Ali Shakir, who works driving a truck. How do you feel about what's going on in Iran? He said the war should really just be between Iran and Israel, and told CBC News that he doesn't think it's fair that Iran is now forced to take on other adversaries like the U.S. We got a much different view from a 23-year-old woman who asked us not to identify her. She fled to Turkey from Tehran in January during the widespread protests that were violently struck down by government forces. Thousands were killed. The woman told us she was planning to return to Iran today, but her mother called her and warned her to stay away a little longer.
I don't really know what's going to happen yet, because it won't end with just Khamenei dying. The whole regime has to fall, and it's not really clear what is going to happen.
It's exceedingly difficult to get an accurate picture of what's going on in Iran. State media has reported several explosions today, and a hospital was damaged in the capital in strikes Sunday night. Iran's representative to the UN says the country's sprawling nuclear facility at Natanz was struck. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, says they haven't been able to yet contact Iran's nuclear regulators.
We hope this indispensable channel of communication can be re-established as soon as possible.
Grossi says elevated radiation levels have not been detected in countries bordering Iran. Briar Stewart, CBC News at the Kapakoi border crossing.
The conflict with Iran is widening. Israeli airstrikes hit the Lebanese capital, Beirut, this morning. Further south, Hezbollah militants are exchanging fire with Israeli forces. Lebanon's health ministry says more than 30 people have been killed in cross-border attacks. The head of intelligence for Hezbollah is believed to be among them. Israel military officials say the Iran-backed militant group will pay a heavy price for attacking Israel and have not ruled out a ground offensive into Lebanon. More than 85,000 Canadians are registered as being in the Middle East, and the government is warning they cannot rely on Ottawa for help getting out. Consular services are limited, and people are being told critical infrastructure and military installations, they could be targets, so to stay away. Here at home, thousands of Iranian Canadians say they are afraid for their loved ones, but hopeful for the future. Caroline Bargut has that story.
Iranian Canadians are celebrating the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Ashdan Kafari lives in St. John's, Newfoundland.
I couldn't believe, really, that we can see after 47 years of repression and cruelty, we can see these days that dictator finally died.
East of Edmonton, Fatima Kahidi says her family struggled in Iran because of the Supreme Leader's reign. Now that he's gone, she is hopeful.
For him to be gone, it's good for humanity. It's good for everyone.
In Toronto, thousands gathered. Many carried posters with the slogan, "Make Iran Great Again," below a photo of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. He is the exiled son of Iran's last Shah, who fled the country during the Islamic Revolution of 1979.
Now we want the son of previous king to come back to help us to establish a new regime, which is based on democracy.
Back in Vancouver,
of Iran.
Supporters are thankful for the international community's help, but say lasting change must come from within Iran, not from outside forces. Caroline Bargut, CBC News, Vancouver.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada and India are embarking on a new relationship. He's meeting with his counterpart, Narendra Modi, in New Delhi. Carney says theirs is a valued partnership, one that is about to include new ambitions. This morning, Carney announced a deal worth billions of dollars between India and a Saskatchewan-based company.
The government of India and Cameco have signed a major $2.6 billion uranium supply agreement supporting India's nuclear ambitions and our shared commitment to clean, reliable baseload power.
By 2030, our country is expected to double trade to $70 billion annually. Frank Stronach's lawyers are pushing for some of the sexual assault charges against him to be stayed. The auto parts magnate is facing 11 charges linked to 7 women. He's pleaded not guilty. His trial resumes this morning in an Ontario court. Jamie Strachan reports.
One after another, 6 women have testified, often in gritty detail, that they were sexually assaulted by Canadian businessman Frank Stronach. Almost all told of meeting Stronach at his long-closed Toronto restaurant, Rooney's. The alleged assaults took place at Stronach's waterfront condo, another midtown building, and at a Toronto hotel. The allegations span 1977 to 1990.
This is raising issues related to memory.
Toronto lawyer Linda O'Brien, who is not directly involved in this trial, says these cases are challenging. In this case, during often blistering cross-examination, Stronach's lawyer keyed in on testimony given in court, never before mentioned in statements to police, and vigorously challenged recollections of events and details.
There's going to be that blurry memories, faded memories, because at no point during a sexual assault is the complainant thinking, I'm going to be cross-examined on this someday.
There's something else looming over the case. The defense has filed an abuse of process motion to be heard at the conclusion of the trial, alleging the Crown coached witnesses during trial preparation. Former Crown Michael Korstein, also not involved in this case, says it's reserved for extreme cases.
It's an extremely high threshold for the defense to meet, and the Crown conduct has to be deemed, for lack of a better word, shocking to the average member of the community.
If successful, some charges against Stronach could be stayed, effectively dismissing those counts. The seventh and final complainant is expected to testify today. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
An Ontario man came up empty-handed after listing thousands of dollars in tickets with resale giant StubHub. CBC's Go Public team investigated and uncovered questions about ticket transfer rules and weak consumer protection. Rosa Marcatelli reports.
Months before the race dates, Formula One fan Paul Mann bought 9 three-day passes to the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal. When his group trip fell apart, he listed 7 passes on StubHub.
It seemed like the best choice, honestly, the safest choice.
The digital tickets sold and then vanished from the site. StubHub blamed a glitch and promised a fix. It never came. And here's the kicker. Mann was out more than $6,000 in lost sales. And then StubHub charged him an extra $3,200 in penalties. StubHub later blamed ticket transfer restrictions put in place by race organizers, saying that's what blocked Mann's tickets from being delivered.
I was shocked.
University of Toronto's digital platforms expert, Evan Light, reviewed StubHub's user agreement for Go Public.
Basically, they absolve themselves of any responsibility for anything. The text is quite amazing.
Despite all that, StubHub is still listing non-transferable tickets, saying transfer restrictions aren't fair to consumers. Grand Prix de Canada organizers disagree, though, saying the resale site isn't allowed to do that, and warns tickets might be cancelled. After Go Public inquiries, StubHub gave Mann his money. Rosa Marcatelli, CBC News, Calgary.
That is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm Martina Fitzgerald. This is CBC News.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Manitoba YouTube page. I'm Corey Funk. Marcia Marcusa is away this week. Right now, we are sitting at minus 20 in Thompson. You're heading for a high today of minus 16. And at the Forks, minus 10, heading for a high today of minus 1. Coming up this half hour on the show, where might tip go? That's what servers across Canada are wondering after money went missing from a tip distribution app used by restaurants. So we're going to hear from an industry expert about what that's meant for the industry and what needs to change to make sure that doesn't happen again. That's what's coming up right here on Information Radio. Stay tuned. (8:11) right now. Let's check in with Heather Wells with a look at news headlines.
Good morning. Well, one person is unaccounted for after a house fire in the Lord Roberts area. The city says firefighters arrived to heavy smoke and flames when they were called to the 600 block of Nassau Street South. It happened late Saturday. We'll hear more about that. A Winnipegger who spent years on a wait list for a highly specialized surgery is now on the road to recovery. Daniel McClellan had to get his jaw joints replaced because his lower jaw had partially fused to his skull, but only a handful of surgeons in Canada could perform that procedure. We'll hear what happened coming up in our next local news at 8:30.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That's Heather Wells at the CBC News Desk. Abby Adiyemi, what's going on in the weather?
Yeah, we still have that extreme cold warning in effect for parts of northern Manitoba this morning, specifically towards the Tuduli Lake region and around Boucher. We're tracking that prolonged period of dangerous cold as wind chill values hit like minus 45 to minus 50 today. Additionally to that, Churchill is under that near blizzard advisory. Not yet, but if the wind speed continues, we might be seeing that develop overnight. For the Winnipeg area, we're seeing temperatures hover around minus 10, minus 11, partly cloudy. The sun trying to make its appearance outside. We're looking at a mix of sun and clouds today for this Monday. Temperature is going to be holding steady between minus 9 and minus 4 this morning before we climb to a high of minus 1. The winds will start from the breezy conditions from the south before it shifts directions to the northeast by the afternoon period. Across the southern regions, we're seeing temperatures between minus 5 and minus 16, while up north, that life-threatening deep freeze really holding things down. We're looking at temperatures split from minus 21 around the part to minus 32 around the Tuduli Lake region, with the wind chill close to minus 43 in most of the regions. But for Tuduli Lake, we're seeing minus 46 wind chill values there for now. Winnipeg right now, we are hovering around minus 10, minus 11, depending on where you are in the city. We warm up to minus 1 later.
Thank you very much, Abby.
Thank you.
That is Abby Adiyemi today behind the glass. And Sierra Sanders is in with a look at the commute. Hello.
Hello. It has been a quiet morning on the commuter line as folks gear up for this wonderful, lovely march that we are hoping to have. So it's been quite quiet on the commuter line. So to me, that sounds like the commute is moving smoothly this morning, which is nice to have on a Monday morning. But there's still a little bit of time left in the show. So if that does change and something does show up or come up in your commute, I'd love to hear about it. You can give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number is 204-788-3093.
Well, I remember back in the day when I was a server, you'd hear that tink of the coin in the tip jar, and it was a wonderful sound. And as the shift went on, it would fill up and fill up. And in the last 15 minutes, whoever on your shift was the best at math would spend time in the back divvying them up between the front of the house and the back of the house. But these days, most restaurant payments are digital, which means when we tip our servers, that money ends up sitting in a digital cloud somewhere. And some restaurant owners rely on third-party digital wallet platforms like XTM and everyday payments to help them send tips to their staff through digital prepaid cards or apps. But as of late, it's been a nightmare for restaurants across Canada that use these systems. Last week, the Bank of Canada told restaurants to stop using these apps after tip money went missing. And CBC reached out to XTM and its affiliate entities, and they are pointing the finger at each other. And there's no information about where the money went. Rudy's Eat and Drink general manager, Mackenzie Robb, says they know tips matter for their staff. And she told CBC's Mike Arsenault why they skipped using third-party apps like XTM.
Shutting down.
Right. You know, it's something when the whole tip card programs started coming out of the woodwork, it was definitely something that we looked into, and just, we've always had our own systems in place that have really made a lot of sense to us that we're just able to maintain in-house. I think, the apps and those programs, they might seem lucrative from a corporate standpoint. Again, I'm not sure if you're a larger organization, if there's any lucrativeness in a kickback or some kind of incentive. I'm sure there's lots of pros, but obviously there's cons with any system as well. So I think we just erred on the side of caution and wanted to just keep doing what we knew and what was working for our staff. And it's unfortunate that, these issues have occurred for others.
That was Rudy's Eat and Drinks general manager, Mackenzie Robb. And now let's go into what all this means for restaurant workers. Food reporter and hospitality consultant Corey Mintz joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Funkman.
It's the two Corys. That's how we need to differentiate, right? So let's just start here. Can you just start from the beginning? Can you just describe the chaos? I'm sure you have contacts all over the restaurant industry. Can you just describe for me the chaos that's unfolded for restaurants on the ground since that Bank of Canada kind of order came out?
Sure, it's more than just the Bank of Order Canada. It's what happened once this money started disappearing. It's a huge problem, and it's a problem that I don't like people who say I told you so and I never say it, but I did tell you so. It's a problem that they were warned about more than 2 years ago, that there was something fishy about this company. But unlike the manager of Rudy's, who you got that great quote from, who did some due diligence and said, let's be cautious and not hand over our financial transactions to some fintech company. A lot of companies said, oh, we see an efficiency here. And as a result, a lot of restaurants and a lot of employees are simply out money that they need to pay their bills.
And which kind of restaurants are the most impacted? Like you said, Rudy's said no. Is it a lot of like kind of independent restaurants kind of opted out, and it's the bigger chains that are impacted by this, or who's seeing the worst impacts of this?
This is across the board. It's a fairly widely used platform, XTM, and when I reported on it 2 years ago, there were big chains. I don't want to name any of them for fear that I was getting them wrong, but major national brands.
And so why were you so skeptical of this 2 years ago? Is it because of the privacy issues, or what was it?
The flag that came up in my case was I heard from workers whose workplace had said, hey, instead of our previous system, we're going to use these prepaid credit cards, which is what XTM does. And the workers were concerned because instead of the traditional system, I don't know if you want to get into that, they were told, you're now going to get your tips on these prepaid credit cards. You can withdraw the cash that you need because, of course, you can't pay your rent. Your income is not your income is not your hourly wages. It's the tips. You need that to pay your rent. You can't pay your rent on prepaid credit cards. You can't pay your hydro bill on prepaid credit cards. But they could go to specific ATMs to get out money. And if they went out of service, meaning like if they went to not one of those machines, but a TD or an RBC, they got charged $1.50 per transaction. And the idea that workers would be paid to access their own money felt A, egregious, and B, illegal. And so I did some reporting for the Globe and Mail at the time, and then a follow-up, I think, about a few months later, just to look into more of the legality of it. And at the time, there was concerns about money going missing from these accounts, and that was kind of swept aside. And it was more about the pure legality of, can someone get between an employer and an employee to extract value, which is what this fintech model does, and is that okay? At the time, I found another competing firm that did the same thing without finding a way to screw over or take advantage or exploit employees. And I advocated, hey, go check them out. Obviously, a number of large companies either didn't take the time to do that research or did and say, but this works out best for us.
So now, fast forward 2 years now, this money's missing. What do we know about where it's gone?
Well, if a guy says, I'll hold your money for you and make sure it gets to the right place, and then the money disappears, where do you think the money went?
Right. But there's been no official confirmation by Bank of Canada or any sort of, government entity.
No, it's all alleged now. Like I said, I found this company suspicious from the start. There was a quote in there was a Globe article from a week or two ago by Angela, I think, Podgorski. And there was a quote in the article from the XTM CEO saying, we're so broke, we're using ChatGPT as our lawyers. So that sort of suggests this is a firm, facing bankruptcy who obviously had financial problems. If money disappeared, it's not a huge guess where the money went.
So in the meantime, then, what are restaurants doing to distribute tips, and what are they doing to tell their staff about what happened to their tips, or to make sure they get made whole?
Right. So while this company is stopped from operating, restaurants need to go back to, for now, their traditional systems before finding, if they can even trust, a new digital model. And the traditional system is, when you go out to eat and you leave money on the table, and as you said, over 90% of transactions are all digital now. But when you leave money, whether it's on your credit card or debit card or whatever, that's called a direct tip. At least according to the CRA. As opposed to a controlled tip, which is when you, say, book a caterer and you already prepay for everything. And the big difference is in a controlled tip, that money is in the hands and accounts of the employer and therefore taxable. Restaurants operate under that direct tip model, whereby they can say, we never actually had this cash, so we're not paying tax on it. And in order to maintain that sort of facade, the manager every week has to go to the bank, take out cash, sit down with their Excel spreadsheet, figure out everyone who worked how many hours, which shifts, all these points, fill up envelopes full of cash. I mean, this is why XTM and other platforms were so attractive. They really saved a lot of time, a lot of the manager's time, hours every week. And I think most restaurants right now will probably go back to that and say, hey, we know it's not time effective, but we trust the envelope full of cash situation. We know where the envelopes are. And then maybe we'll explore another model. I found when I was reporting this a couple of years ago for the Globe, a company called Atlas, which I think is going through a rebrand under a different name. And they were using a similar structure in terms of digital distribution, but using a different model where the money went directly into an account held by the sort of tip committee, which is a sort of legal distinction where employees govern an account, so it's not in the hands of employers, but it went then directly into employees' accounts instead of what I consider a scam of the prepaid credit cards. So, I'd encourage operators to sort of long-term start looking into a solution like that, and short-term, go get some envelopes, go to the bank, take out cash.
Go old school. There might be some people who are listening to this thinking like maybe this wouldn't be a problem if servers were just paid more and patrons were just charged more. Is this a chance? I know we've kind of talked about tipping culture throughout the years from the pandemic. There's always been this like, hey, there's a time to reevaluate. But is this a chance for restaurants to reevaluate, tipping culture in general and the headaches that it can cause, even behind the scenes?
Sure, it could be, and maybe for one or two operators it will be. I'm a tipping abolitionist. I think it's a horrible practice. I would love to see it done away with. But I've been following it now enough that I've seen the cycles come and go. And the pandemic was the greatest opportunity for getting rid of that system, given how much it disrupted operations. It shifted employment around. And there were some restaurants who did take that opportunity to change the way they do business. But the industry as a whole said, we would like to return to the status quo. So I think this will be a case where, it upsets a lot of businesses and people will maybe make that consideration. But the industry as a whole, they've already had their come to Jesus moment of whether or not they're going to change their ways. And they already decided not to.
And, when someone's going to a restaurant now these days, what should they keep in mind besides the fact that their servers might be, low-key, a little bit more grumpy about the fact that they are, might be waiting on their tips?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, ultimately, most of us, unless we know the restaurant and have seen their books, we have no way of knowing how tips are distributed. I'd absolutely advocate for, in any province, mandating some transparency on the menu, on the website, for where tips go. But at the very least, kind of strike up a conversation about XTM and ask people, like, how are tips handed out? What platform is used in this company? If only to express your displeasure to an owner, like, hey, I really don't like the system that I just heard stole from employees, but that's about it. We can never really know where tips are going in restaurants. Everyone has their own little system and their own fiefdom.
Right. And people don't necessarily go out looking to critique the back end tip distribution system. They're going out for a good time, right? So I think that
it's fairly preposterous to say, hey, before we pay the bill, could you bring me your accounting book so I can see how you structure your payroll?
Right. Well, Corey, we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Always have an episode of The Two Corys.
That's Corey Mintz. He is a food reporter and hospitality consultant here in Winnipeg. XTM Incorporation's CEO, Marilyn Schaefer, has told CBC, quote, "I am the entrepreneur of a solution Canada used for the past 5 years for digital tip disbursement. Out of the 3 entities that make this solution happen, who has the bounty? Certainly not XTM nor me, who has my entire life savings wrapped up in XTM," unquote. Time now is 8:26 here on Information Radio. I'm Corey Funk, sitting in for Marcy Marcus, and we have time for a bit of music before your news. And Winnipeg-based band Prairie Line is making a massive splash in the local scene after a whirlwind year of award nominations. The group recently took home multiple nods at the Manitoba Country Music Awards, including Group of the Year and Emerging Artist. And from their debut single, here is Prairie Line with A Long Way to Go.
Punching my time since 8 a.m. on that Monday, and now I'm watching that clock tick-tock away like it should. I'm gonna feel out, no doubt, get gone, set fire to the weekend. Just watching that sun go down, only one place in mind. It's a long way to go when you're living for the weekend. The damn week was so slow, so hell we're burning it down. And if you're ready for it, baby, I think it's time you let it roll. Spend my money on the weekend, 'cause it's a long way to go. We're riding that line for town, pedal down just to get there. We're pushing those dirt roads west about as far as they'll go. Where the beer is ice cold and we know it's a long way to go when you live for the weekend. The damn week was so slow, so hell we're burning it down. And if you're ready for it, baby, I think it's time we let it roll. Spend my money on the weekend, 'cause it's a long way to go. It's a long way to go when you live for the weekend. Yeah, we were so slow, so hell we're burning it down. And if you're ready for it, baby, I think it's time we let it roll. Spend my money on the weekend, 'cause it's a long way to go. Come on!
That's Prairie Line with A Long Way to Go. You heard right here on CBC Radio 1. Well, looking ahead to tomorrow's show after 8 o'clock, you'll want to tune in because Federal Industry Minister Melanie Joly is joining us live here in studio after 8 o'clock. She's in Winnipeg this week. She's speaking to the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce on Wednesday morning. So ahead of that, she's going to join us in studio to talk about Canada's Defence Industrial Strategy, and her talk is called Canada's Defence Industrial Strategy and Manitoba's Opportunities. So she's going to come on the show. We're going to talk about what she thinks Manitoba could see from that strategy and the impact it could have as the federal government plans to boost its defence spending domestically. That's coming up tomorrow after 8. But right now, your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 8:30, we're still at -10, partly cloudy, and it is a mild start to the first Monday of March. We are above seasonal, a high this afternoon of -1. The conflict with Iran is widening. Israeli airstrikes hitting the Lebanese capital Beirut this morning. Further south, Hezbollah militants exchanging fire with Israeli forces. Lebanon's health ministry says more than 30 people have been killed in cross-border attacks. The head of intelligence for Hezbollah is believed to be among them. Israeli military officials say the Iran-backed militant group will pay a heavy price for attacking Israel and have not ruled out a ground offensive into Lebanon.
We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth speaking at the Pentagon this morning. Hegseth accuses Iran of waging a one-sided war against America for 47 years. He says Tehran was given every opportunity to make a nuclear deal, and he laid out the U.S. mission for this war in Iran.
Destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy and other security infrastructure, and they will never have nuclear weapons. We're hitting them surgically, overwhelmingly, and unapologetically.
Hegseth says the U.S. is setting the terms of this war. 4 American military members were killed in the initial attack on Iran, dubbed Operation Epic Fury. Hegseth calls them the absolute best of America. On the streets of downtown Winnipeg, Iranian Winnipeggers and supporters celebrating at Portage in Maine. Shala Shojai says she was proud to be celebrating in Winnipeg as people also dance and cheer at the same time on the streets of Iran.
Iranian congratulations to each other for the death of Khamenei, the dictator, and for the death of the other people who their hand was blood, has blood of our innocent people in their hands.
A different group also rallied in Winnipeg, concerned the recent strikes are setting a dangerous precedent. Around 40 protesters gathered outside the U.S. consulate, arguing the intervention breaches international law. Candace Bodnarik is with Peace Alliance Winnipeg.
We can't start saying that, well, these rules, these enshrined rules under the United Nations apply to certain states, but not these states. Or human rights apply here and not here. I'm just thinking that, we can't have the Americans and the Israelis going around as the world police.
Under the UN Charter, foreign attacks on another country are only allowed in self-defense or if authorized by the UN Security Council. One person is unaccounted for after a house fire in the Lord Roberts area. The city says firefighters arrived to heavy smoke and flames when they were called to the 600 block of Nassau Street South around 11:30 Saturday night. It took more than 3 hours for the fire to be declared under control. The house sustained extensive damage. A Winnipegger who spent years on a wait list for a highly specialized surgery is now on the road to recovery. Daniel McClelland had to get his jaw joints replaced because his lower jaw had partly fused to his skull. Only a handful of surgeons in Canada can perform that procedure. He says after CBC News did a story 2 years ago, a Saskatchewan doctor reached out. McClelland says after about 3 years waiting and 2 years of procedures, he is now almost fully healed.
I couldn't open my mouth. It was just barely enough to get, milkshake in there. Pretty much I'm almost back to normal. We just kind of align my jaw, so I have some screws in my mouth, and I'm doing exercises, and it's pretty, we're close.
The province says Manitoban surgeons are able to perform the surgery. They say only 8 people went out of province for this particular procedure in the past 3 years. Well, March may be coming in a bit like a lamb, but winter isn't quite done with us yet. Dave Phillips, climatologist at Environment and Climate Change Canada, says even though spring doesn't technically begin until the 3rd week of March, they do start looking at the spring forecast now.
We're showing it to be a little kind of near normal to warmer than normal in the southern part of the province, but colder than normal in the central Manitoba Lakes area, and then in northern Manitoba. We still see winter hanging on for another month or so.
Phillips says in the south, we won't see any long, drawn-out polar vortex, but we may still see a few days of cold winter weather. Well, you can find more news updated throughout the day. All you have to do is head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Boo. I was really hoping he would tell us that that spring is here.
Are you booing Dave Phillips?
I'm booing the news that he delivered to us. I think we're all pretty tired of winter by now.
Yeah, it seems long. I know,
Every year.
Everyone says it's getting shorter, but it still feels really long.
No, still hurts. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
That's Heather Wells at our CBC News Desk. Also, big thanks to everyone who helped put together today's show. Sofia Peralta Baron, Sierra Sanders, Jim Agapito, Heather Wells at our news desk, Joni Nicolo, Megan Ketchison, and Darren Bernhardt. Also, thanks to our studio team here, Abby Adiemi, Sierra Sanders, and Darren Morash on our YouTube feed. And Nelly Gonzalez is our show producer, and Leif Larson is our senior producer. of audio. Abby Adiemi, what's going on with the weather?
Well, the southern regions will definitely be enjoying a mix of sun and clouds. Just stay near that freezing mark, while up north we're seeing dangerous combination of falling temperatures near blizzard-like conditions towards Churchill and the extreme cold of -47, -48, -49 wind chill towards Tudula Lake and Brochet. For the south, we're looking at -5 to -16 at this time. Up north, we're seeing -29 and -13. The south gets to -1 today.
Thank you very much, Abby.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. I'm Corey Funk, in for Marcy Marcusa. The Current is next, and tomorrow, Industry Minister Melanie Joly joins us live.